Hello, I am the Viper. I know you guys are watching this video to fall asleep, so before you do that, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me where you are from and what time you're watching this video. Now, let's begin.
On Thursday, May 19, 1983, 27-year-old Diane Downs drove on Old Mohawk Road in Springfield, Oregon. Her 3 children were in the back seats: Christy, 8 years old, Cheryl, 7 years old, and Danny, 3 years old. The song Hungry Like the Wolf by Duran Duran played on the radio. It was late and completely dark, save for the headlights on Diane's new red Nissan Pulsar with Arizona license plates, but she was not worried. She was used to driving on back roads in the dead of the night. For her, this was a common occurrence, and she would soon be home. All went as normal until the family crossed paths with a stranger. Diane stepped out of the car and approached the stranger, a bushy-haired man. Suddenly, he pulled a gun on her and demanded she hand over the keys. She did not. The stranger closed the distance between himself and Diane's red Nissan Pulsar. He then reached inside the car and fired 3 times. Diane's mama bear instincts took over. She feigned throwing her keys into the darkness. The 2 of them got into a physical altercation. The stranger pulled the trigger 2 more times as Diane got back into the driver's seat. 1 bullet landed in Diane's arm. She sped off to the nearest hospital, Mackenzie Willamette. She shouts, "Somebody shot my kids." Upon the family's arrival, medical professionals jumped into action. They hauled 2 children from the back seats. They didn't notice the 3rd. Cheryl lied face down on the front passenger seat floor. Diane alerted one of the nurses. Cheryl was completely still, but the nurse soldiered on. Off-duty hospital staff members were called in, including a surgeon who turned his 20-minute commute to work into less than 10 minutes by flooring at 80 miles per hour. They reached out to a hospital in the neighboring town of Eugene for additional aid. Diane stayed in the waiting room with a beach towel wrapped around her injured arm. The hospital receptionist tended to her. Diane phoned her ex-partner, then her parents, before she learned that her middle child Cheryl died from her injuries, but Christy and Danny were alive. The police listened to Diane's story and jumped straight into the investigation. The small community of Cottage Grove was shaken by the story of the strange gunman who attacked a single mother and her 3 children. There was someone violent wandering around freely, and every man, woman, and child was in danger. Unfortunately for Diane, she was a bad liar, and even worse, the police knew it. Elizabeth Diane Fredrickson was born in 1955. She was the oldest of 5 children born to Wesley and Willadine Fredrickson. In the earlier years, the Fredrickson family moved around often as Wesley jumped from job to job. They settled in Phoenix, Arizona when Wesley found stable employment at the post office. Wesley and Willadine Fredrickson were conservative. They were deeply religious and emotionally distant. Young Elizabeth wanted attention, and if she did not get attention from her parents, she would get it from her peers. Elizabeth had a hard time fitting in with kids her age because of her upbringing. Her parents placed her under very strict rules dictating how she could dress, where she could go, and what she could do. Elizabeth was often bullied for her appearance and clothes. She tried to rely on her smarts and accomplishments to get the attention she craved, but ultimately, she would leave the strategy behind. In her teenage years, Elizabeth started to rebel. She started wearing makeup and dyeing her hair blonde. She also began to go by her middle name, Diane. A change in her appearance led to positive results. Her male peers gave her the attention she so desperately wanted. She decided that this kind of attention was better than any she could get from her parents, and so she put all of her effort into chasing that euphoria. While attending Moon Valley High School, Diane met her fellow classmate, Steve Downs, and the 2 would begin dating. They were practically attached to the hip throughout high school, and they did not shy away from showing physical affection in public. Diane's parents did not approve of her relationship, much less the new persona that she had adopted. Diane did not care about what her parents thought, however, and she continued her relationship with Steve. After her high school graduation, Diane attended Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College in California. Steve enlisted in the U.S. Navy, and the 2 would try to maintain a long-distance relationship. Diane could not keep her end of the bargain, however, and it did not take long for her eyes to wander. She had multiple affairs, including with university staff, while maintaining her relationship with Steve. Her promiscuous behavior eventually earned her an expulsion, and she had to move back to Arizona with her parents. When the news reached Steve, They broke off their relationship, but not too long after Diane moved back with her family, Steve returned from the Navy. Diane felt smothered by her parents' rules, so she sought out Steve. They rekindled their relationship, and on November 13, 1973, they ran away to get married. Diane and Steve were only 18 years old. Christy Ann, the couple's oldest child, was born on October 7, 1974. When Christy was 6 months old, Diane left the family to join the Navy. She only made it through 3 weeks of basic training before she returned back home. Diane first said she was injured with severe blisters, and this is why she couldn't complete boot camp. She later said Steve neglected Christy, and she had to leave to take care of her daughter. Diane and Steve's marriage was far from a happy one. Coming off Diane's past infidelities, Steve was always on edge. He overanalyzed every interaction Diane had, fearful that he would lose Diane to cheating again. Steve himself was also said to be juvenile in nature and a player. Their high school honeymoon days were done, replaced with constant arguments in public and in private. At some point during the Downs marriage, Steve obtained a .22 caliber pistol. Diane also bought a .22 caliber rifle, as well as a .38 special as Christmas presents for Steve, and he taught her how to shoot all 3 of these guns. After the birth of their second child, named Cheryl Lynn on January 10, 1976, Steve elected to get a vasectomy. He knew he did not make enough to support a family bigger than the 4 of them. When Diane got pregnant once again, she got an abortion, which she would go on to say she regretted. However, she had another affair and gave birth to her sons Steve and Daniel Downs on December 29, 1979. Steve knew that Diane's third child was not his, but he and Diane would not divorce until 1980. Diane said she loved her children, but her actions showed that she was somebody that didn't necessarily enjoy being a mother. Christy, Cheryl, and Danny's clothes were old, and their hair was often unkempt. Diane was often seen berating her children. Steve said she denied them attention the same way Diane's parents denied it to her. One day, Cheryl was put in timeout by a sitter for jumping on the bed, and Cheryl, in response, told the sitter that she wanted to remove herself from the earth with one of her father's guns because her mother said that she was bad. She couldn't get anyone to watch her kids. Diane often left them in Christy's care, who was herself still a kid. She was only 6 when her parents divorced, and only 6 when Diane turned her into free childcare for the first time. Diane already worked for the United States Postal Service, but as a newly single mother, she needed to find a source of extra income. She underwent psychiatric testing on 2 separate occasions to become a surrogate mother, but she failed both times. The results showed that she was psychotic, meaning she was detached from reality. Her judgment skills and understanding of social cause and effect were also shown to be lacking. Now, despite this, she was allowed to become a surrogate and gave birth to a baby girl in 1982 and was paid $10,000. She was interested in becoming a surrogate again, and even in opening a surrogacy clinic of her own. For this, she would need to attend medical school. Her father encouraged her to attend summer classes at Mesa Community College. Diane wrote an essay that she titled Child Abuse during her summer semester. It read, "The gruesome crime of child abuse not only destroys the lives of our children, but it usually brings terror into the lives of our grandchildren. Abused children develop different personalities depending on the type of abuse they receive and the amount of abuse they must endure. Personalities developed in abused children stay with them all their lives. They may receive counseling or some form of help which turns the child around, but no one can take away the scars and pain inflicted on an innocent child forced to submit to mistreatment. It will ultimately affect that child's life as an adult. Then the scarred child turned adult has children of his or her own. These children are usually abused in some way or another by their parents. I wish we could stop this vicious cycle. If we could only take a whole generation and stop child abuse, we could wipe out the plague. Generation after generation, the abuse continues. If you abuse your child, he or she will no doubt abuse your grandchildren." In 1981, Diane met Robert Knickerbocker, a married co-worker. Robert was in a rough patch in his marriage, and his wife begged him to move from Texas to Arizona to be closer to her family. Their new home was smaller and twice as expensive as their old home. Robert wanted to buy a plot of land, which meant they both had to work full-time. They were tired, stressed, and holding unspoken resentment for each other. Robert would take any distraction he could. Diane was pregnant with a surrogate child when they met. After the baby was born, the hot Arizona summer came in full force. Diane dressed in a provocative, less than professional way that got Robert's attention. Their workplace acquaintanceship soon turned into an affair. Robert was not interested in anything outside of a physical relationship with Diane. She pretended to accept this while secretly obsessing over him and the life they could share together. She marked the day of their first illicit encounter on her calendar with a big red X. Robert tried multiple times to break off their relationship. One way or another, Diane convinced him to stay with her. When she encouraged him to serve his wife with divorce papers, Robert realized he was way out of his depth. He did not want to be a father, much less to someone else's children. He was upfront with Diane about this. He never wanted to see Diane while she was with her kids. Steve contacted Diane, looking to reconcile their marriage. Robert encouraged her to at least try. During this period, Robert said Diane and Steve got into a physical altercation, and that she showed up at work the next day with a black eye, a swollen nose, and black and blue bruises on her face and neck. Robert had a few interactions with Steve. In August of 1982, the two men had a face-to-face meeting. Steve told Robert, "Diane is kind of crazy when it comes to sex. She has some problems, emotional problems about it." Following month, Steve took in Christy, Cheryl, and Danny. While in their father's care, Christy and Cheryl were able to attend Pomeroy Elementary School. Same time, Diane started her fall semester at Mesa Community College. Weight of her classes and her job proved to be too much for her. She dropped out of school after only a few weeks. Soon, Diane called Robert, accusing him of giving her an STI. He finally ended his relationship with Diane and confessed to his wife, who had already suspected as much for some time. They were both infected with the same STI, which they suspected to have gotten from Diane. Diane's surrogate contract stated she couldn't have an STI at the time of insemination, but she still flew to Kentucky for the procedure, where she was subsequently turned away. Diane didn't actually believe Robert when he broke up with her. She thought he would be there to bring her home from the airport. Instead, it was Steve. He brought her first to his house, then to Diane's mobile home. Throughout their time together that night, Steve said Diane clawed her own face, kicked him, and muttered comments about removing herself from the earth. Diane locked herself in the bathroom. Steve banged his fist on the door, and when he heard a bang, he broke the door down. Now Diane was fine. She pointed a gun at him. It was the .22 caliber pistol, which she had snuck into her purse from Steve's home. Steve took the gun away from her and observed a bullet hole in the bathroom tile. Diane and Robert still had to see each other at work. Now, against his better judgment, he slept with her again, and the affair resumed. Diane got Robert's name tattooed on her shoulder with a rose. Robert's wife put the pieces together quickly, but still she remained silent. Diane flew back to Kentucky for another insemination procedure. During this time, her mobile home caught on fire while she was away. Diane got $7,000 from insurance, and Steve fixed some of the damage for free. However, Robert claimed Diane told him that she asked Steve to burn the trailer down so she could collect the insurance payment. For a brief period, Robert agreed to start a life with Diane. They agreed to sign a lease on an apartment together. Diane called Robert's wife numerous times, half gloating, half daydreaming about the future they would have. Diane used the money from her first surrogacy payment and the insurance from the fire to open a surrogacy clinic, despite not having any experience, licenses, or qualifications. The clinic failed, unsurprisingly. In February of 1983, Robert drunkenly proposed to Diane. She wrote in her diary, "I could hardly believe my ears today." Robert said he would live in the same house with my kids and me, of course. Then he said he would have to marry my ass, but I think I can talk him into all of me. I'm so happy. Just when I thought he would call off our relationship, he said that he would marry me and live with my kids. But before I get too excited, I'll wait a while. He could take another look at the situation and change his mind. I hope he doesn't. I sure love him. That same month, in the apartment Robert was staying in at the time, Diane asked Robert to choose between her and his wife. Robert chose his wife, and Diane became angry. Robert left the apartment and called his wife from a phone booth. She picked him up in her car and drove back to their marital home. Diane followed them. She pounded on the door and rang their home phone all night. After this encounter, the Knickerbockers decided to vacation to Texas. Still, they could not get away from Diane. They were visiting their old friends when their phone rang. It was her. Diane memorized this friend's phone number, and Robert realized she must have gone through his wallet at some point. Diane said she got a successful work transfer. She would be moving to Oregon in April, and she would be taking her kids with her. Christy and Cheryl were made to pick which parent they wanted to live with. They picked Diane as they were afraid of hurting their feelings. Danny was not Steve's son, and he was 3 years old, so he did not have a choice. The Knickerbockers returned from their vacation, and again, Robert and Diane saw each other at work. Again, they slept together. Diane had less than a month left before she had to move to Oregon. Robert asked Diane to move in with him until she had to leave. He got a rose tattoo like Diane's, but without any script. He did not want her name forever inked on his body. Diane left Arizona for good, and Robert returned to his wife for good. They met up only one more time when Diane decided she wanted to return Robert's gold chain necklace. She left a rose in his work mailbox. She harassed the Knickerbocker household with letters and packages. Robert put return to sender on every piece of mail he received from Diane. Steve noticed his 3 firearms were missing. He assumed Diane took them and thought nothing of it. She was a single mother in a new state. She needed protection. In May of 1983, one of Diane's new co-workers, Heather Plord, mentioned that she was thinking about buying a horse. Some nights later, Diane saw a horse rental ad in the newspaper. Diane decided she would pack her children in the car after their dinner to visit Heather and show her the ad. She said she also thought it was a good opportunity to get the kids out of the house. Now, on their way home from the Plord residence, Diane said she stopped when she saw a stranger signaling for her help. She got out of the car, and he demanded that she hand over her keys. She refused, then gunshots. When Diane arrived at Mackenzie Willamette Hospital, medical staff took the 3 children while Diane waited in the lobby. Cheryl originally went unnoticed until Diane called out Cheryl's on the floor. She hasn't moved at all. She was still and unbreathing when they brought her into the trauma room. A heart monitor showed a flat line. A nurse tried to remove the blood from her throat. Maybe that would get her to breathe again. She was thick and congealed. Cheryl was not actively bleeding, which was not a good sign. A doctor found 2 bullet holes in her back. He realized Cheryl was dead upon arrival. She was only 7 years old. Christy had a stroke, and she was unconscious and barely clinging to life. A bullet was still in her body, and another had torn straight through her chest. Her right lung would collapse. A massive hemorrhage in her left lung blocked the flow of oxygen. Her heartbeat went from weak to completely non-existent. Surgeons could not get her heart beating with an injection alone. They inserted a catheter tube into an artery and pumped Christy with blood. Her heart did start beating again. Her right lung was no longer collapsed. The left's hemorrhage remained. While Christy was asleep, a surgeon stitched the exit wound in her left lung shut. She could have died at any moment, but she came out of the surgery alive. She woke up aware of her surroundings, but would not be stable enough for further surgeries until later. Danny was awake and frightened. Unable to breathe, tubes were forced into his chest. There was gunpowder on his back, and the bullet hole was likely a contact wound. The bullet hit dangerously close to his spine. Doctors knew there was a chance that Danny would never walk again. Hospital receptionist Judy Patterson was on the phone with a police dispatcher. She saw Diane go into the bathroom. She heard running water. Diane came out of the bathroom and asked to use the phone to call her parents. Judy got more information from Diane about where the shooting took place. Diane tried to go into the trauma room, but Judy stopped her. This is when she saw Diane's arm. Injuries were minor and superficial. On any other night, one of the licensed nurses or doctors would be available, but every capable body was accounted for. So Judy herself tended to Diane's wounds. As such, she got more information from the mother about what happened. Diane said, "We went out toward Marcola to see a friend. We were headed back driving along Old Mohawk Road. My kids were laughing and talking. I was laughing at something Danny said and talking to Christy. There was this man standing there in the middle of the road. He looked like he needed help. I stopped the car and got out. He wanted my keys. He just reached in through the window and shot my kids. It's a terrible thing to be laughing 1 minute and have something like this happen to you." Judy let Diane use the phone. She called Robert Knickerbocker, then her parents Wesley and Willadine Fredrickson. They lived only 2 miles from the hospital, and they rushed to be at Diane's side. Less than 10 minutes after Judy Patterson's call, officers from both Springfield and Lane County arrived. Diane recounted the shooting to them and said the first of many conflicting details. Her children were asleep, and not as she told Judy, laughing and talking. Hospital staff and law enforcement took note of Diane's demeanor. She was calm. She had her mental faculties. She wasn't visibly upset or hysterical. Sergeant Robin Rutherford asked if she could show them the crime scene. The earlier they could start investigating, the quicker they could find the culprit. Diane agreed. Her father, Wes, joined them. On her way to the police car, Diane commented on her Nissan. "I hope my car's okay. Does it have any bullet holes in it?" Sergeant Rutherford took the wheel. Along the way, they passed the newly placed patrol cars parked on Old Mohawk Road. No late-night driver could enter or leave without first speaking to the patrol officer. Police and a search dog scoped out the road and the fields for any sign of disturbance. The road itself was quiet, but it was not completely uninhabited. There were a few private residences, and some of these properties had horses. Rutherford explained to Diane that horses were sensitive to their surroundings. If a stranger disturbed their home, the horses would know. They're almost as good as dogs when something alien gets into their fields. This is what Rutherford said. Now, Diane brought them out to the scene of the crime. She remembered, as she put it, the icky yellow car that belonged to the stranger. However, they did not find one. Diane complained of pain in her arm, so Rutherford radioed for another officer to transport her and Wes back to Mackenzie Willamette. Sergeant stayed behind. When Diane returned to Mackenzie Willamette Hospital, she received the news about Cheryl's passing in the critical state of Christy and Danny. Her reaction to Danny in particular gave everyone pause. It was a glimmer of good news. There was a chance he would live. But to this, she said, "Do you mean the bullet missed his heart?" Gee whiz. Detective Dick Tracy, yes, that is his name, and Doug Welch brought Diane aside for further questioning. They both found Diane to be unnervingly composed. Detective Tracy described her as very rational, considering what she had undergone. Tracy recognized the kind of wound in Diane's arm as similar in location to wounds in his past cases, where a perpetrator shot themselves to turn suspicion away from them. Diane described the man who shot at her kids as white in his late 20s, about 5'9", 150 to 170 pounds, dark hair, a shag-wavy cut, and a stubble of a beard, wearing a Levi jacket and an off-color t-shirt. She agreed to allow investigators to search her home. She said she owned 2 firearms, a .38 Special and a .22 caliber rifle. When Diane was finally allowed to see Christy, investigator Paul Anton said he saw the little girl was terrified. Her heart rate spiked from 104 beats per minute to 147 beats per minute when Diane took her hand saying, "I love you, I love you." The day after the shooting, Heather Plord and her husband confirmed that Diane visited them late at night with the horse rental ad. After searching Diane's home, they took her rifle, some .22 caliber ammunition, calendars, and a diary from the property. The bullets recovered from the children were .22 caliber, and investigators figured they had to have come from a rifle or a handgun. Diane's story and the close contact injuries on the children, they decided the firearm was more likely to be a handgun. Based on the blood splatter in the car, the shooter had to shoot from the left side. Diane was asked to retell her story multiple times, and minor details changed. Her children being awake or asleep, the position of the shooter, and how she reacted to him, just to name a few. Investigators asked Diane to reenact what happened on camera in a parking lot. It's 4 days after the shooting, and Diane was excitable. She was giggling, fixing her hair, and seemed to be enjoying herself. Her arm was in a cast, and she hit it against the car doorframe used in the demonstration. "I just hit my cast," she cried out, and she said that was worse than okay. Investigators could only speculate what she wanted to say. When Steve Downs learned his daughters were shot and that one was dead, he flew to Oregon from Arizona. Danny may not have been his child, but he worried for his well-being as he worried for Christy's. Investigator Doug Welch asked Steve if he knew who Diane called, aside from her parents, the night of the crime. Steve told Welch about Robert Knickerbocker. Diane, in Steve's eyes, still seemed crazy about Robert. Doug Welch and Paul Anton traveled to Chandler, Arizona. There, they interviewed Diane's former co-workers, including Robert Knickerbocker. With his wife present, Robert answered every question about his affair with Diane, even when it was uncomfortable. Both men had airtight alibis that excluded them as suspects. Forensic scientist James Peck spent the weekend studying Diane's Nissan Pulsar. The car itself did not have external damage. This indicated that all 5 bullets from all 5 shots struck their targets. He found 2 bullet casings that were .22 caliber. There were blood and gunpowder particles in the back seat in the front passenger seat, but none in the driver's seat. Cheryl Lynn Downs had her funeral on May 25th. She was cremated and her ashes were scattered in Arizona. Christy and Danny were both in stable condition. They were both paralyzed, Danny from the waist down and Christy in one arm. Her stroke took away much of her speaking ability, but the right treatment and therapy could make her coherent again. Diane's confiscated diary was full of love letters to Robert Knickerbocker. It seems to investigators that they were never meant to be sent, and that Diane used this diary to vent her frustrations following the end of their relationship. Still, Diane's writing style in these letters was unhinged at best and absolutely insane at worst. Some entries were erotic in nature. She wrote about how she thought Robert was her one true love. One entry read, "What happened? I'm so confused. What could your wife have said or done to make you act this way? I spoke to you this morning for the last time. It broke my heart to hear you say don't call her right. I still think of you as my best friend and my only lover. You keep telling me to go away and find somebody else. You've got to be kidding." A poem was written in another. "I love you more than could your wife, yet it's brought sorrow to my life. I just keep hoping and hanging on. How much longer can I be strong? The weapon used to kill Cheryl and wound Christy and Danny was never found. There is a possibility it was thrown into the Mohawk River. Divers were sent to look for the gun, but the current during the springtime was just too strong. It would have been long gone by the time the divers were geared up and prepared." Steve Downs and Robert Knickerbocker both separately told authorities about Diane's third firearm, her .22 caliber Ruger Mark IV 9-shot semi-automatic pistol. Diane was asked about this pistol and claimed that she did not have it. Steve told investigators about the night that Diane fired the .22 caliber pistol in her bathroom. If they found a .22 caliber casing in the Arizona property, they could examine the extractor marks. Now in a firearm, the extractor is the mechanism that removes empty casings from the chamber and makes room for the new one. It will leave distinct marks on the empty casing, similar to a fingerprint. By examining these marks, experts can determine the make, model, and type of firearm used in a crime, even if the weapon itself is never recovered. Steve and the investigators, along with some of Chandler officers, found Diane's old address. Her trailer was abandoned and damaged by the fire. The repairs meant if the bullet was still there, it was underneath the trailer. They spent 2 days in the Arizona heat digging and sifting through debris. They eventually found the bullet. Unfortunately, it had been trapped underground for so long that it was too damaged to be certain it was fired from the same gun that shot the Downs children. It was similar, but similar wasn't good enough. Heather Plord said Diane ended her visit at around 9:45 and arrived at the hospital at 10:48. The shooting was estimated to have occurred at 10:15. Joseph Inman, who was a witness, claimed he was also driving on Old Mohawk Road. He came behind a red car with Arizona license plates driving no faster than 7 miles per hour. He was stuck behind this vehicle for a full 2 minutes before deciding to drive around it. It was 10:20 p.m. at this point. Diane felt the tides turning against her. She offered herself for another police interview, where she claimed to know who the shooter was and that he knew her as well. He probed her for information, and it became a repetitive choir of "I don't know. I don't know." He asked her point blank if she did it. She got angry and left. Most damaging piece to Diane's innocence was Christy, her own daughter. Child psychologist Paula Krogdahl visited Christy every day. Paula was patient, gentle, and understanding. She took Christy's recovery one day at a time, in the little girl's comfort and well-being above all else. Christy told Paula that Diane hit her and her siblings on more than one occasion. Christy also remembered the traumatic night, but would not identify the shooter. Paula still did not press it with her. Instead, during their sessions, she asked Christy to write down who shot her on a piece of paper, and then burn it. It took some time, but one day, Christy let Paula read the name on the paper. It read, "My mom." Christy said on their way back from the Plord residence. Diane stopped the car on a dark road, opened the trunk, pulled out a handgun, and shot the children, and then herself. Diane was arrested on February 28, 1984, at the post office. She was charged with criminal assault, 1 count of first-degree murder, and 2 counts of attempted murder. She was also pregnant. Now, originally, Diane reached out to a lawyer and author named Melvin Belly, who was a celebrity with a legal profession, to defend her. He wanted to, but he was too busy. The courts would not push her trial back for his sake. Attorney Jim Jagger would be the one in the courtroom. Now, Attorney Jagger had the lawyer charisma seen on film and television. Before the first day of trial officially started, he was speaking familiar to the jury members. Prosecutor Fred Hugie thought that the Downs case would be easy. He could not have been more wrong. Diane initially drew a lot of sympathy. He was a professional first and foremost, often described as cold and rigid. If the angry letters sent to his office were anything to go by, the odds were stacked against the prosecutor in terms of public perception. But he did what he would do best, his job. While Prosecutor Hughie gave his opening statement, Diane wrote "lie" in big letters on a notepad and held it on display. Attorney Jagger snatched it from her hands. Prosecutor Hughie said Diane planned to murder her children so that she could be with Robert Knickerbocker. Her children blocked the way to her happily ever after with a married man who only wanted her as a distraction. One of the prosecution's witnesses was a psychiatrist who described Diane as an antisocial, histrionic narcissist and possibly a psychopath. Diane's demeanor during her trial was the same as her demeanor in the hospital, calm, unbothered, and inappropriate given the circumstances. She was often seen laughing with Attorney Jagger. Part of Diane's defense was an aspect of her past she kept secret. Her father essayed her when she was 12. He drove her out to isolated places and came into her room at night to put his hands on her, till one day it stopped altogether. She would talk about this at length on the stand. Wes Fredrickson denied this ever happened. Willardine Fredrickson testified Diane was emotional that night at the hospital. Various doctors and nurses said otherwise on the stand. At one point, the prosecution played Duran Duran's "Hungry Like the Wolf" in the courtroom, same song said to have been playing during the shooting. Diane hummed along, seemingly unaware in the moment that she was being watched by a live audience, a jury, and cameras. Prosecutor Hughie made the difficult choice to bring Christy to the witness stand. She cried, trembled, and she briefly lost her composure whenever Diane made eye contact with her, but she showed great strength for someone her age. Her time with Paula Krogdahl gave Christy the courage to tell the court what her mother did to her and her siblings. Her mother shot them at close range, and then herself in the arm. Attorney Jagger tried to coax his idea of the truth from Christy. She was coached to say these terrible things, but Christy held firm. During the court proceedings, Diane was visibly pregnant. She would give birth to a baby girl in between her trial and her sentencing hearing. She said in a television interview, "You can't replace children. You can replace the effect that they give you. And they give me love. They give me satisfaction. They give me stability. They give me a reason to live and a reason to be happy." June 17, 1984, Diane was found guilty and was sentenced to life plus 50 years. She had to wait 25 years before she could even be considered for parole. Steve Downs was deemed unfit to be Christy and Danny's legal guardian. Prosecutor Huey and his wife, Joanne, officially adopted Christy and Danny in 1986. By all accounts, Fred and Joanne had a relationship built on respect, admiration, and love. They understood firsthand the trials Christy and Danny overcame, and could provide the loving environment to heal and grow that Diane withheld from them. Among the public viewers in the courtroom gallery was Rule, a true crime author. Rule previously published The Stranger Beside Me in 1980, where she chronicled the life of serial killer Ted Bundy and the time in her life when they were close acquaintances. Rule followed the case against Diane Downs very closely, taking notes during the trial, interviewing relevant figures, and researching every scrap of information she could. She was very respected in her field thanks to her dedication to her craft. Her book on Diane Downs, Small Sacrifices, was published in 1987. She gave pseudonyms for Diane's affair partners, including Robert Knickerbocker, whom she referred to as Lou Lewiston. This is why Knickerbocker is often referred to as Lou in many sources post-1987. A two-part made-for-TV film adaptation of Anne's book aired in 1989 and starred Farrah Fawcett as Diane. It won a Peabody Award that same year. Diane released her own book about her life in the shooting with the aid of a ghostwriter titled Best Kept Secrets. It was published the same year. On July 11, 1987, while serving her time in the Oregon Women's Correctional Center, Diane escaped prison. She was missing in action for 10 days. 14 states issued manhunts for her. She was finally found in the home of her fellow inmate. The courts added 5 years to her sentence. Prosecutor Huey insisted on relocating Diane. He lived less than 70 miles from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center. No doubt those 10 days where Diane was missing were incredibly stressful and terrifying for the children. Prosecutor Huey was successful in his efforts. Diane was transferred to the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey. After her recapture, Diane was interviewed from prison on the Oprah Winfrey Show alongside Rule. The interview consists of Diane answering direct questions with essay answers or with a redirection to a particular source. She made inappropriately timed jokes and sarcastic comments and bickered with and Rule throughout the interview. Diane was considered a dangerous offender by the state of Oregon, which meant she was entitled to a parole hearing every 2 years until her release or death. After the first 25 years of her sentence, Diane had her first parole hearing in 2008. She doubled down on her first story. She said she was innocent. She said she was always telling the truth. Douglas Harkelrod, a district attorney in Lane County, countered every point Diane made and emphasized her lack of consistency and accountability. She had 2 more parole hearings in 2010 and 2020, which were both denied. Now, Diane is not without her defenders. They are a minority, but they are vocal. Until he died in 2017, Wesley Fredrickson defended his daughter, even though Diane accused him of assaying her. She would recant these accusations against him, and Wes offered $100,000 to anyone who could provide information that would see Diane released from prison. The Facebook group Free Diane Downs is dedicated to proving Diane's innocence. James Fredrickson, Diane's brother, is one of the page's admins. When asked directly about his arguments, James points to DianeDones.com for access to all of the necessary information. Now, DianeDones.com is, objectively, from a technical standpoint, a bad website. The visuals look like they were transported from the Y2K era. The URL uses HTTP instead of HTTPS, which modern browsers automatically flag as not secure. Half of their documented evidence needs to be downloaded to view, which is bad, to put it lightly. Should any of these files get corrupted, a curious internet user could ruin their device without even knowing it. Diane's defenders point to James Clare Haynes as the one responsible for the crime. James Haynes, also known as Jim Haynes, was a Eugene local said to have been bragging about shooting Diane and her children. Multiple acquaintances of his made affidavits swearing as much. He was also said to be a violent husband and a dangerous criminal. One witness's affidavit said he and Haynes saw a blonde woman in an Oregon drug house who got into a verbal altercation with a dealer. He later claimed to recognize this woman when he saw her face in the news. It was Diane Downs. There is an obituary for a man of the same name within the area who lived from 1948 to 2013. There is also arrest records associated with the name James Clare Haynes in Oregon ranging from aggravated theft to possession of controlled substances, but it is otherwise nearly impossible to find any information about James Haynes separate from the Facebook page or the website. Now, maybe there is a grand scheme to keep Diane in prison for the crimes of James Haynes, or perhaps there's a simpler explanation to this alleged confession. And you see this in the murders of Elizabeth Short in 1947, or JonBenet Ramsey in 1996, or serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, who confessed to many more crimes than he actually committed. And that some people will confess to crimes that they did not commit, whether it's for the recognition or because they're just delusional. In addition, the contents within affidavits can also be considered hearsay within a court of law. Now, to be very clear, there is no known physical evidence that links James Haynes with these shootings. Christy and Danny occasionally spoke about their mother on public platforms, but have lived more private, quiet lives. Christy has a daughter whom she named after her late sister. The baby Diane had before her sentencing would be adopted by Jackie and Chris Babcock, a couple in Oregon who named her Rebecca. Her loved ones also called her Becky. Now, as an adult, Becky was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey, where she discussed how she learned about her birth mother and the effect it had on her. It wasn't a secret to Becky that she was adopted. She was happy with her home life, but still was curious about her biological parents. Her mother, Jackie, fed her small bits of vague information whenever Becky asked, but never anything distinctive. Jackie mentioned there was a book about Becky's birth mother, and Becky tricked a babysitter into uttering the title, Small Sacrifices. At 11 years old, Becky opened in Rule's book and learned about the horrifying crime her mother was convicted of. She didn't get very far in. She tried to put it out of her mind, but she learned more information throughout the years. When she was 16, she watched the Small Sacrifices film adaptation starring Farrah Fawcett. Becky was disturbed. Not only was her biological mother a monster, but one she identified with. Becky recognized in Diane a familiar need for attention and external validation. It was a need she had herself. Becky was already a rebellious teenager, but all of this tipped her over the edge. She fell into substance use and irresponsible behavior. She dropped out of high school and lashed out at her family. She gave birth twice and had to put her second child up for adoption. At just 21 years old, feeling isolated and alone, she reached out to Diane for the first time. Diane was initially excited to hear from Becky. They wrote each other letters, and overall they had good interactions, but Diane could not hide her true nature. She was obsessive, manic, and unhinged. Diane wrote that there was a conspiracy against her, that Becky was being observed, and that the real shooter had not been brought to justice. Diane eventually accused Becky of being part of this conspiracy, and this is when Becky stopped all contact with her. Becky Babcock told the public her story in 2010 and said she ultimately regretted ever reaching out to Diane Downs. In more recent years, she has gotten married, fought an ongoing battle with lupus, and runs a non-profit dog breeding business for golden doodles and cockapoos. Overall, she is living a happy life. As of 2024, Diane Downs is serving her sentence in the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. She is 69 years old as of the date of this recording. She will likely, thankfully, never be released. Case 2. In late October 1994, late at night, a frantic woman rushed into a family's home in a small South Carolina town, desperately begging for help. She had been carjacked, and her 2 young sons were taken. As soon as the media caught wind of the story, the entire nation joined in the search for the missing boys. Teams of police officers and volunteers searched every corner of the town, and even the FBI got involved. But it was all in vain. The boys seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. The mystery of that night became one of the most notorious criminal cases of the decade. When the truth was finally revealed, it sent shockwaves around the world, an ending that no one saw coming. On the evening of October 25, 1994, Union County Police in South Carolina received a call from a local resident whose peaceful evening had been shattered by a distraught woman, hysterically banging on the door, begging for help to find her children. That evening, Susan Smith had been on her way to visit a friend with her sons, Michael and Alex, safely buckled in their car seats in the back. Shaken and terrified, she recounted how a man had jumped into her car at a red light, threatened her with a gun, and demanded she keeps driving. A little later, the attacker pushed Susan out of the car, telling her to get out of there. When she pleaded to take her children with her, he coldly replied, "I don't have time for that." Panicked, Susan ran to the nearest house to call for help. Seeing how shaken and terrified she was, the homeowner himself dialed 911 and explained what had happened. David Smith, Susan's ex-husband and the boy's father, found out about the incident while at work. He received a call that gave him little information, only that Michael and Alex were missing. Without hesitation, David rushed to Susan's side and found her in utter despair, sobbing uncontrollably. He could barely make out what she was saying. It was only when he spoke to the police at the scene that he was able to get more details. The family was immediately swarmed by representatives from various media outlets, all eager for details and requesting interviews. The young parents cooperated, knowing that widespread coverage could be crucial. According to Susan, the carjacker had ordered her to drive around John D. Long Lake, and once they reached the destination, he forced her out of the car. And he drove off, completely ignoring the boys' cries, a detail that truly baffled the police. A nationwide search for the vehicle was immediately launched, with Sheriff Howard Wells escalating the case beyond Union County in South Carolina, involving the FBI as well. Meanwhile, Susan and David Smith were doing everything they could to find their sons. As Susan explained, the man who hijacked the car showed no interest in her, didn't attempt to take her purse, but still drove off with 2 crying boys in the back seat. Something about this just didn't quite make sense. The very next day after the incident, the state police sent a team of investigators and a forensic artist to Union to create a composite sketch of the man who committed the crime. Based on Ms. Smith's description, the suspect is a black male in his 20s or 30s, wearing a plaid shirt, blue jeans, and a blue toboggan-style hat. It was last seen in the Smith car, a 1990 maroon Mazda Protege. Law enforcement officers and volunteers combed the woods near the reported abduction site. The first priority was to search the nearby woods and the area around where the carjacker had pushed Susan out of the car. They hoped the man might have realized that stealing the vehicle had turned into a much more serious crime and could have left the children somewhere soon after abandoning their mother. Police helicopters hovered over the area for hours, searching for Michael and Alex, while the Department of Natural Resources sent in a team of divers. They put in every possible effort, as locals referred to John D. Long Lake as the Black Bottom. Anything submerged just 6 inches below the surface became completely undetectable. From time to time, the The police also received calls claiming that the boys had been spotted in various locations, and every lead was thoroughly investigated. As expected, detectives turned to their existing databases, knowing that in any area, there could be someone with a prior record or arrest for similar crimes. This approach often helps catch criminals within hours. The longer the search for the boys continued, the more anxiety grew. The hope that the perpetrator had simply dropped the children off somewhere was fading with each passing day. Although David and Susan Smith were nearing the final stages of their divorce when their sons disappeared, they reunited during the search. They chose to stay at David's parents' house, believing it was best to be together and readily available to the authorities at all times. Both parents loved their children deeply, but that wasn't enough to save their marriage. After the separation, David often said that while he and Susan made a terrible couple, they were exceptional parents. Day after day, new tips came in, keeping alive the hope that Michael and Alex would be found safe and that they would be able to hold them once more. Every lead was meticulously followed, with Sheriff Howard Wells frequently sending all officers out of state to chase down fresh clues. But it was all for nothing. The children and the elusive carjacker seemed to have vanished into thin air. Nevertheless, Sheriff Wells held twice-daily press briefings to keep the media and public informed. As the entire nation anxiously awaited any updates about Michael and Alex Smith, the tireless search had stretched far beyond the initial search area. After 3 days, there was still no trace of the suspect or the vehicle. People who initially believed the boys or the car would soon be found abandoned began to wonder what had truly happened to the children. Sheriff Wells' ongoing optimism and his actions left many puzzled. If the perpetrator had no intention for the boys, why hadn't they been found yet? We do not have the children, we do not have the suspect, we have telephone tips, reports matching descriptions, we have information coming in from friends, from relatives, from psychics, from General Crackpot, but we've got to go through all of it. A command center at the Sheriff's Department in Union, South Carolina, is taking calls on the case around the clock from all around the country. In town, posters of the children adorn the storefronts. Yellow ribbons call for their return. We've had another day of aerial search, water search, a horseback patrol to try to develop leads in this case. Searchers don't know what happened. All they know is somewhere there has to be evidence of the missing boys and the car. Do you think it's possible that the children are still alive, and with this man being driven around? Not only is it possible, that's my hope right now. If he's still driving around, that gives us more opportunity to find the vehicle and the children. In high-profile cases like this, support often comes from those who have faced similar tragedies themselves. I called the Polly Class Foundation, see if there was anything I could do. I just want the kids back. Polly Class was abducted at knife point from her bedroom the night of October 1st, as she and 2 girlfriends overnighted at her house. Mark Class, who had founded an organization to help grieving parents, had spent years aiding families in their most painful times. He answered the Smith family's call for help and flew to Union County. But surprisingly, Susan and David refused to meet with him, and Susan's cousin stepped in as the family's spokesperson to the press. I have a statement here written by Susan and David, and I want to read this to you. It is so hard to explain how much we love those 2 little boys and how much we miss them. The hardest part is not knowing where they are. Why are you speaking instead of the parents? David and Susan have been through a tragedy that is unimaginable to most of us, and it has just been extremely difficult for them to be able to gather the emotional strength they need to face this. Class was stunned. From his own heartbreaking experience, he knew that parents were usually the best advocates for their missing children. Yet, for some reason, the Smiths chose to retreat from the public. Why? Class's confusion was completely understandable. In such desperate situations, parents typically do whatever is necessary, no matter how exhausted they are. The Smiths' decision to cut themselves off from a nation that was praying for their children immediately raised suspicions. Susan claimed that a black man had forced his way into her car while she was stopped at a red light. He supposedly made her drive along Highway 49 toward the lake, then pushed her out of the car, leaving the boys in the back seat. Most carjackers who would take a car not realizing there are children in the back seat will immediately abandon that car. As the search continued day after day, public sentiment toward Susan Smith shifted to one of growing skepticism. Class, however, was determined not to give up. He had come to Union to advocate for Michael and Alex, so he began interviewing various people in the community. Eventually, he spoke to the neighbor across the street from the Smiths. While Susan had informed the police that she left home around 8:30 that evening, this neighbor had a different account. "Oh no, she left much earlier, probably around 6 or 6:30, she said, recalling that she had seen the young mother leaving with her 2 children. Additionally, Susan had changed her story several times regarding what she was doing that night. At first, she had mentioned she was going to visit a friend. He lives in Monarch, and it wasn't far from where the red light was. I only had maybe a mile to go. It was even that long, and I didn't make it. They located the friend and questioned him, and he confirmed that he wasn't expecting any visitors that evening. He wasn't even at home. She had never gotten to the friend's house. We questioned the friend and found out he wasn't at home. In light of this, Susan altered her story, stating she had been at Walmart. The police followed up with the store, but none of the employees remembered seeing her with her children that night. What concerned the investigators the most was the intersection where Susan claimed the carjacking took place. The situation she described simply couldn't have happened at that specific location. On Highway 49, the traffic light was configured so that vehicles traveling east to west, which was the direction Smith was headed, always had a green light. A red light would only be visible if another vehicle was crossing the intersection. This caught the detective's attention, as it meant that at least one vehicle must have crossed the intersection, implying there should have been a witness. However, Susan maintained that there were no witnesses. Law enforcement officials arranged to meet with Susan and David again for additional questioning and verification. They first interviewed the father of the missing boys and conducted a polygraph test with a seasoned specialist from the FBI. David was cleared as a potential suspect that very day, but Susan's interviews, along with those of the detectives and the polygraph examiner, had to be repeated several times. Susan Smith took multiple polygraph tests and, without a doubt, failed 3 of them. The police could have straightforwardly informed the public that Susan had lied repeatedly while answering the detectives' questions and was clearly concealing something. However, Sheriff Howard Wells was cautious to do so. He was carefully navigating the situation and worried about spooking his most intriguing suspect. David Smith was fiercely committed to recovering his children at any cost, insisting that engaging with the press was vital, stressing that the media depended on them more than they depended on the media. As their hopes started to fade, Sheriff Wells recognized that his strategy was leading him closer to the true culprit, and that was the person he needed to concentrate on above all else at that moment. The police, detectives, FBI agents, and even the experts who had been involved in the investigation from the start recognized that Susan Smith's account was filled with significant gaps and, alarmingly, suspicious inaccuracies. Sheriff Howard Wells announced he would be holding a press conference. David Smith found out about the situation from the television and felt as if he were caught in a cruel joke. He had faith in his ex-wife and thought of her as a loving mother. He couldn't imagine for a moment that Susan could do anything horrific to their children. The initial alarm was raised by the medical examiner who had spoken with Susan on Wednesday, October 26th. After their discussion, he informed the sheriff, "From what I can tell, she is involved in this case." The police had done an impressive job, carefully examining every detail of Susan's story and closely monitoring her actions. The turning point came on Wednesday, November 2nd, when the polygraph examiner posed the question, "Is it possible that the carjacking took place somewhere other than where you've described?" He calmly explained how the traffic light functioned at that location and suggested that the incident might have happened at a different spot. Experienced investigators often use a strategy known as giving a suspect another rope to hang themselves. Susan seized on what she believed was a chance to shift blame and altered her account, saying the incident happened in a rural area 13 miles from where she initially claimed. The detectives quickly countered this by letting her know that the new location was closely monitored due to an operation targeting illegal substances. This exchange didn't go on for long. Susan soon cracked under the pressure. Sheriff Wells, the polygraph examiner, and their team took Susan aside for another interview. They had a strategy in mind. Some of the sheriff's statements were just a bluff. He knew she was lying, but he needed her to confess because the police had no clue about what really happened or where the children were. Wells' double game was aimed at carefully unraveling her fabrications, leading her to the point where she would feel obligated to confess. Eventually, Susan revealed the truth to them. The car was in Lake John D. Long and the children were inside, submerged beneath the water. The police dispatched drivers to the lake. Although they had previously searched the area, they hadn't found anything due to the murky water hiding the car. When the vehicle was finally pulled from the water, the children were indeed inside. The Smith family held a visitation at the Holcomb Funeral Home in Union. Scores of local residents filed in to pay their respects. A funeral for the two young boys is scheduled for Sunday. When news of Susan's confession broke, the local community was completely caught off guard. She had made numerous appearances on television and had genuinely touched the hearts of people all over the country. Everyone was left with the same question. Why? What could lead a mother to commit such an act against her own children? David Brooke, Susan Smith's lawyer, showed her confession to a few reporters, despite the fact that publishing it was prohibited. He aimed to shift public opinion about his client. On that fateful day, Susan drove to Lake John D. Long, fully intending to end her life and taking her sons with her to prevent them from having to live without their mother. The lake featured a boat ramp, where Susan started to drive down but paused halfway. After a brief moment, she moved a little further and stopped again. At that point, she got out of the car and released the handbrake, which caused the vehicle to roll into the water with Michael and Alex still inside. The defense contended that this was an unsuccessful suicide attempt rather than a coldly calculated crime, while the prosecution, led by attorney Tommy Pope, argued that her motives for the crime was related to a relationship with a younger man, who found the children to be an obstacle. Smith worked at a company in Union called Conso, where she fell for the owner's son, Tom Findley. A well-known bachelor, designer, and artist, Findley became the main focus for the divorced mother. About 10 days before the boys went missing, he broke things off with Susan, writing her a letter that carefully explained their relationship could have been more serious, and he might have fallen in love with her if it weren't for her children. Tom acknowledged that Michael and Alex were great kids, but made it clear that he simply didn't want to be a father. At that moment, Findley likely had no idea of the dark path Susan was being pushed towards. Prosecutor Pope found it fairly easy to validate his theory. That night, when Susan drove the car with the boys into the lake, she was wearing a dark red hoodie, a gift from Findley, and her trunk was packed with odd items, including her wedding albums and maternity clothes. It was evident that Smith was trying to bury her old life. The frustration of the public, law enforcement, and everyone involved in the search for the children intensified in the months leading up to the trial. On the day the trial began, a crowd of people and reporters gathered outside the courthouse, all eager to hear Susan's defense. However, she chose not to testify, realizing she could never adequately explain how her wish to end her life resulted in the tragic deaths of Michael and Alex, along with everything associated with her sons, her marriage, and more. There was no doubt that Susan would be found guilty. The key question in the trial was whether she would live after what she had done. It's just hard to hear. Next week, the same jury will meet to hear testimony and consider her sentence. She could get life in prison with a chance of parole after 30 years, or death in the electric chair. Public sentiment was split on what kind of punishment Susan Smith should receive. Take her in there and just throw her in there, and like death ain't too good for her. I don't think it's right that she done something like that, and she shouldn't go free for doing it, but I don't think they should take her life for doing it, because it's not going to bring her kids back. Tommy Pope invited David Smith to share his thoughts during the final hearing, and he agreed. Susan Smith's ex-husband David Smith arrived here at court earlier today, and he is openly supporting the prosecution's effort to seek the death penalty. As the heartbroken father spoke, tears filled the courtroom. This man's life had fallen apart. It was the most difficult thing I've had to do, I guess, since I buried Michael and Alex. Even Susan was affected by his words. As she left the courtroom after the verdict was announced, she whispered to him, "I'm sorry." Tommy Pope also initiated an experiment with a car. They found a similar vehicle and set up cameras in the back seats to capture the events from Michael and Alex's perspective as the car sank into the water. The footage revealed how the water rose, eventually reaching the boys' seats. It took 6 minutes for the water to reach the cameras. Susan Smith had those 6 minutes to save her sons, but instead, she spent that time fabricating a story about a black assailant at a traffic light. Susan Smith was sentenced to life in prison, with the jury choosing not to impose the death penalty and allowing for the possibility of parole after 30 years. David Smith divorced her before the trial and, with the help of his family and friends, managed to rebuild his life. He later remarried and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. They know who Michael and Alex were and the tragic events that unfolded. As for Susan, the end of her 30-year sentence, which would allow her to apply for parole, is approaching quickly. Preliminary reports indicate that her first parole hearing may be scheduled for November 2024. Will she be granted her freedom? There are concerns, particularly since it had been reported that she contracted a sexually transmitted infection while in prison due to extended relationships with 2 guards and several female inmates. Throughout her time behind bars, she has led a rather tumultuous life, which will likely be a factor during her parole evaluation. Case 3. Samantha Josephson was a smart and ambitious young woman. Her outstanding exam results earned her a full scholarship to the University of South Carolina's law school. Her parents were incredibly proud of her achievements and admired her determination. Samantha was bold and funny, genuine and kind, a combination that made her stand out. Most of her time to studying and preparing for exams, Samantha rarely had a chance to catch up with friends. But on Thursday, March 28, 2019, the 21-year-old decided to take a well-deserved break. She and her classmates planned a night out to celebrate their final year at college, choosing the Bird Dog Bar, a popular hangout spot among students. Meanwhile, 120 miles away from Columbia, in the city of Charleston, Samantha's boyfriend, Greg Corbishley, was at home. The two had been dating for 2 years and shared a deep, genuine love for each other. They kept in touch constantly, texting throughout the day to share updates and dream about their future together. Around 2 a.m., Samantha decided it was time to head home. She planned to call an Uber to take her back to the hub. Although bars in South Carolina don't close until 3 a.m., she had work in the morning and wanted to leave early. So, she left the bar ahead of her friends on her own. Since the couple was in a long-distance relationship, Greg often used a safety app on his phone to keep track of Samantha's location. That night, he opened the app to ensure she had safely gotten into her Uber and was heading back to the hub. However, when Greg checked the screen, he noticed the car was going in an entirely unexpected direction. The situation immediately felt suspicious and concerning. Greg tried calling Samantha, but she didn't pick up. Growing more anxious, he reached out to her roommates, sharing a screenshot of the last known location from Samantha's phone. Around 5:30 a.m., her friends went out to look for her, but after searching the area, they found no trace of Samantha and eventually returned home. Greg woke up around 11:45 a.m. to find 3 missed calls from Samantha's roommate, Carly. When he called her back, he learned that Sammy had never made it home the previous night. The sense of urgency grew with each passing moment. It was clear that something was seriously wrong. Concerned for her safety, Greg quickly headed to Columbia. On his way, he called Samantha's parents to let them know she was missing. Desperate to find Samantha, her friends called every local hospital and even checked her computer, hoping to find some useful information. They found a record of her Uber request, but discovered that the ride had never taken place because Samantha never showed up for that ride. Anxiety quickly turned into panic. No one knew what had happened to her or where she was. In desperation, one of her friends reached out to the police and reported her missing. Greg arrived in the city on Friday afternoon. After meeting with the police, he, along with Samantha's friends, actively assisted the detectives in searching for his girlfriend. The first thing Greg did was head to the area where his phone had last tracked Samantha's location. He walked around, knocked on doors, and asked if anyone had seen anything unusual, but came up empty-handed. Eventually, it was Samantha's friends, not the detectives, who decided to review the surveillance footage themselves. And fortunately, they found something. The manager of the Bird Dog Bar shared the security footage with them. In the video, we clearly see Samantha standing by the entrance of the bar before entering. Once inside, the footage shows her with her group of friends. Everything seemed normal, just a group of young people having a good time, with no signs of anything out of the ordinary. Around 2 a.m., Samantha is seen talking on the phone as she leaves the bar, likely arranging her ride. The street camera footage shows her leaving the bar, stopping near a tree with her phone in hand, waiting for her Uber. Soon, a car pulls up, and Samantha steps into the road, approaching the vehicle and preparing to open the door and get in. However, the driver drives off, clearly not there for her. She returns to her spot and waits for her ride to arrive. Eventually, a dark, 4-door sedan arrives, and we see Samantha walk up to the car and immediately get in. Greg and Samantha's friends knew that the Uber ride had been canceled because the driver was unable to find her to pick her up. But the footage clearly showed her getting into a car, and something didn't add up here. This could only mean that the car wasn't her actual Uber. A heavy silence filled the room as everyone processed the unsettling reality. Greg handed the footage over to the police, and they immediately launched a search for the unidentified vehicle. The footage clearly shows Samantha getting into the car, and if you look closely, you can spot the silhouette of the driver. Only one figure is visible inside, meaning there were no other passengers. The car is seen slowly cruising through the 5 Points area, and the last known location of the vehicle was about 1.5 miles from where it started. After it left that area, the police lost track of it, as there were no cameras further along the route. Fortunately, they were able to identify the car model, a new Chevy Impala, and immediately issued a lookout alert. The police also examined footage from before the incident, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious Impala's license plate. The video shows the Chevy Impala cruising around the area about 15 minutes before it picked up Samantha. The car slows down now and then, but only for short moments, no longer than a minute. In the footage, we can see the car turning into the parking lot near the Bird Dog Bar, making a U-turn and heading toward the exit. There it stops, almost as if the driver is waiting for its target. From this position, the driver has a clear view of Sammy, standing alone. After waiting briefly, the car pulls up next to her and parks in an empty spot. The investigators needed to follow every possible lead to see where it would lead. They reached out to Samantha's parents and asked them to check her bank statements, hoping someone had used her card after she disappeared. Sure enough, they found that in the early hours after her disappearance, someone tried to withdraw cash from her account at an ATM 43 miles from Colombia. At last, they had a solid lead, and the investigators quickly sought permission to access the surveillance footage from that ATM. In the footage, what looks to be a male, dressed in all dark clothing, wearing gloves and trying to conceal his identity. The unknown individual attempted to withdraw cash multiple times using the missing woman's card, and about an hour later, he tried again at a different ATM. In the second video, he is seen trying to withdraw money once more, with his face fully covered by tightly pulled hoodie strings, sunglasses, and a bandana. He went to great lengths to keep his identity hidden. Later, around 2 p.m., a call came in from New Zion, a small town east of Columbia, to one of the police stations. 2 turkey hunters were walking around the area looking to see if they could find any turkeys. As they were making their way back to the car, one of them spotted something odd and suspicious between the trees. When he got closer, he was shocked to find a lifeless body. The girl fit the description of the missing Samantha Josephson. By the time that she was found, her body was in a horrifying condition, almost unrecognizable due to numerous injuries. The investigation later confirmed that she had been stabbed nearly 100 times. On the night of March 30th, around midnight, Samantha's parents arrived at the station and were led into a meeting room. Inside, they saw a long table, and standing next to it was someone with a coroner label on their badge. The moment they spotted this, everything became painfully clear to them. Samantha's mother broke down in tears, while her father, overwhelmed with anger, smashed a chair. At that moment, Greg entered the room. When he saw the expression on Samantha's parents' faces, he immediately understood what had happened. The discovery of Samantha's body shifted the investigation's focus, escalating the case to a whole new level. Nearly everyone at the station on duty that day began searching for the black Impala. Officers spent hours combing the Rosewood community, where Samantha's phone had last been tracked, but it was all in vain. Frustrated, the detectives decided to head back to the 5 Points area, where everything had started. As they were leaving the Rosewood community, they unexpectedly spotted a black Chevy Impala that matched the description exactly. The officer informed dispatch that he was about to pull the car over. The driver's behavior clearly showed he was nervous, as it was obvious that a simple document check wouldn't resolve the situation. One of the officers quickly went to search the car, hoping to find a bag of marijuana, which was illegal in South Carolina. By the driver's seat, the officer discovered a set of keys, a pink phone, and a USB flash drive, the kind commonly used by students. The keys had a label that read "Room." It was obvious that these items belonged to a woman. As the officer continued his search, he opened the back door, and when he shined his flashlight inside, he was struck with horror. The forensic team took over the evidence found in the car, while 24-year-old suspect Nathaniel Rowland was brought to the police station. The investigators attempted to question him, but he refused to say anything and remained silent. It's not unusual for suspects to remain tight-lipped and uncooperative during investigations. Meanwhile, students and faculty at the University of South Carolina gathered to pay tribute to Samantha. A large crowd had gathered, and each of her friends gave emotional speeches, each one describing Sam as their best friend. This spoke volumes about the kind of amazing person she was. While Nathaniel Rowland continued to deny any involvement in Samantha's case, the detectives contacted his girlfriend, Maria Howard. She agreed without hesitation to come to the station and share everything she knew and had witnessed. The suspect's girlfriend told investigators that he was at home when she went to bed, but by the time she woke up, he was gone. This meant that on the night Samantha was last seen, Roland could have easily left for up to 7 hours, more than enough time to commit the crime and return home. After talking to Maria Howard, the investigators had enough evidence to get a search warrant for her home. In the trash bags in the backyard, police found clothes belonging to Nathaniel, along with cleaning items he had used, and paper towels stained with blood, likely the same ones he used to clean the blood from the backseat of his car. Officers also uncovered what they believed to be the murder weapon, which is a multi-purpose tool. The police later learned that Roland had gone to mobile phone sales and repair shops the day after Sammy went missing. It seemed he had tried to sell an iPhone that belonged to Samantha Josephson, but something went wrong. Eventually, the rose gold iPhone was found in Roland's car. The investigators then compared the store footage with the surveillance of the unknown man trying to withdraw money using Samantha's bank card. The clothes Roland wore in the store while attempting to sell the iPhone matched exactly with the man at the ATM, particularly the hoodie with distinctive white drawstrings. This same hoodie was later found in a trash bag. At this point, there was no doubt. Nathaniel Roland was the one who had committed this brutal crime. With this solid evidence, the investigators were now ready to officially charge him. Roland couldn't explain how blood ended up in his car and never gave a reasonable justification for his actions. Based on the numerous pieces of evidence, the investigators were able to reconstruct the events of that night. Roland had gone out looking for an easy target, someone vulnerable whom he could trap and take advantage of. He drove around the city for a while until he spotted a young woman alone. There was no effort required on his part. Sam unknowingly got into his car, thinking it was her Uber. Once the car started heading in the opposite direction, the attacker locked the doors. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. What he didn't expect, however, was the strength of Samantha Josephson. She wasn't one to give up easily. She fought back fiercely, desperately trying to escape. During the forensic investigation of the car, investigators discovered shoe impressions even on the back window. As for why Roland chose to end her life in such a brutal and merciless way, unfortunately, only he knows the reason. Once Sammy stopped breathing, Roland drove her 70 miles to New Zion. On his way back, he tried to use Samantha's credit card, but was unable to do so. There was more than enough evidence against Nathaniel Roland, making it easy for the prosecution to take the case to trial. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now this man is separated from society and can no longer harm anyone. It is the justice that Samantha's parents and boyfriend fought so hard for. He's taken my daughter. He's taken my dreams of being a grandmother to Sammy's kids. Just all my dreams for her. He's taken a lot. He's taken my trust in the world. Case 4. Jamie Rose Boland was born in Edmond, Oklahoma on August 7, 1995 to parents Curtis Lynn Boland and Jennifer N. Boland. Jamie had bright red hair, blue eyes, and freckled cheeks with a gentle smile. Her family said that even though she could be shy, she was always interested in making new friends, and she only saw the good in other people. Her uncle said she was smart and sweet, and her dad said she was able to laugh at almost any situation. Her nickname was Copper Top, and her favorite color was green. Her classmates said she wasn't part of any group, but she never had anything mean to say about anyone. Jamie was in the 5th grade at Purcell Intermediate School and had met her best friend Carissa at the beginning of the school year. They were both in Girl Scouts together and were very close. Carissa said, "I feel like she's my sister. We would sit at the tables and eat breakfast together. We'd play at recess together." Jamie liked playing with dolls and sewing. She enjoyed singing and dancing and had made up her own cheerleader dance that she liked to perform for her family. She liked being outside riding her bike and loved any opportunity to ride a four-wheeler. She loved spending time with her dad, watching movies, and beating him at checkers. Her dad said she was just starting to come into her own. She was becoming her own person. Jamie's parents raised her in the small town of Dibble, Oklahoma. She was around 2 years old. Her parents separated and eventually divorced. Her mother went back to her maiden name, Jennifer Fox, and moved to Guthrie. After the divorce, Jennifer had a couple of serious relationships and 2 more daughters. Those relationships also ended. She decided to pursue her dream job as a truck driver. She left Jamie with Curtis and her younger girls with their fathers in order to make the long trips. To fill up her days alone on the road, she began using crystal, and she struggled with substance use for several years. But she finally got clean in 2005, and she was determined to stay clean for her children. Meanwhile, Jamie and her dad stayed in Dibble for several years. In 2005, they moved to Purcell, which is another small Oklahoma town. They moved into an upstairs unit at the Purcell Park apartment complex on North 8th Avenue. The apartment complex, Jamie met her new neighbor, Kevin Ray Underwood, who also had bright red hair. He rented the downstairs apartment just across the breezeway and had been living there for about a year and a half when Jamie and her dad moved in. Kevin was quite shy. He spent a lot of his time at home playing with his pet rat named Freya and posting online to sites like MySpace and Blogger. He had an online blog called Strange Things Are Afoot at the Circle K. He had worked at a nearby Carl's Jr. for many years, but had recently gotten a new job at a local grocery store. One of his coworkers at the restaurant, Ricky Woods, said Kevin didn't have many friends. He said there were some people he would talk to, but 90% of us he would not. For about a year, Ricky and his 8-year-old daughter lived in the apartment above Kevin, but he said they rarely saw him except for when he was doing his laundry or getting his mail. Ricky said Kevin would go in his apartment, shut the door, and no one would see him for the rest of the day. Kevin's mother said her son was a hard worker and never got into any trouble. He once received a speeding ticket, but he had no other contact with law enforcement. She said he struggled with social anxiety, and he had been on the antidepressant medication Lexapro, but at some point, he decided to stop taking it. His mother said that near the end of February of 2006, he had started taking the Lexapro again, and he was trying his best to improve his life. Even though he wasn't friendly, many of his neighbors and coworkers thought he was a nice guy, just a little quiet and a bit of a loner. However, when he was online, Kevin was a different person. Now, in real life, he didn't have a girlfriend, but he had been in an online relationship with a woman named Melissa Custer for almost a decade, and he told his mother he had fallen in love with her. He arranged a trip to California to meet her, but Melissa canceled the meeting and told Kevin she just wanted to be friends. According to his mother, Kevin was crushed by Melissa's rejection. Without an intimate partner, he was frustrated and frequently used the internet to find stimulating images. Over time, those images got darker and more disturbing. Eventually, he found cannibalistic adult films and became obsessed with a fantasy of butchering a human body and eating it. In his online blog, he made a disturbing joke, asking, "If you were a cannibal, what would you wear to dinner?" He answered his own question with a punchline, "The skin of last night's main course." In another entry, he wrote, "I really need a girlfriend. My fantasies are just getting weirder and weirder, dangerously weird. If people knew the kinds of things I think about anymore, I'd probably be locked away." No one in Purcell knew about his online writing, though, and most people didn't think he seemed dangerous. Still, a couple of his neighbors noticed odd behavior from him. Manager of the apartment complex, named Tim Bayer, said he sometimes noticed Kevin standing outside and watching the neighborhood children play. Another neighbor named Daniel Downey said he'd seen the same thing, but incorrectly assumed Kevin had a child of his own. He said, "I always see him looking at kids, so I thought he had kids." At work, he was given the nickname Zombie Kevin because of his disturbing comments. For example, on one occasion, he pointed out a pretty customer to his co-worker, Michael Horner, and asked him, "I wonder what she would taste like." Michael said he found the comments disturbing and worried that Kevin might kill someone someday. Meanwhile, Kevin continued to talk to Melissa via online messaging. Though most of their chats were normal, his dark thoughts crept in sometimes. Sometimes it was through a joke, like in December 2005, when he told her he had to go shopping and pick up milk, eggs, bread, and human souls. In early 2006, his comments got more and more disturbing. In January, he told her he was going to kill someone if he couldn't find someone to sleep with soon. Later that month, he told her normal intimacy no longer aroused him. In February, he told her he wanted to write an explicit children's book. We'll just leave it at that. He also admitted that he was fascinated by gore and death. He told her he was looking at online images of mutilated corpses. He'd become addicted to what he described as weird and gross erotica. Though he was shy and didn't talk to many people, Kevin seemed to go out of his way to befriend his young neighbor Jamie. She was shy too, but young and trusting. Sometimes he would come out of his apartment with his rat sitting on his shoulder. Over time, Jamie got comfortable enough to pet the rat and talk with Kevin in the breezeway. They talked often, and she had been in his apartment several times, even though her father had told her she wasn't allowed inside of anyone else's apartment. One day near the end of March, Kevin was sitting inside his apartment watching cartoons with his front door partially open. Jamie noticed the open door and walked in, asking if she could pet his rat. After hanging out for a little while and watching cartoons with Kevin, she left. On April 11th, Jamie's dad told her to use the payphone at the apartment complex to order pizza. Since they didn't have a phone at their apartment, they often used the payphone when they needed to make calls. Kevin said she could use the phone in his apartment, and she followed him inside, but she told him she'd get in trouble with her dad, so she took the handset to his cordless phone out in the breezeway and placed the pizza order. And again, nothing bad happens. It's easy to imagine that she just might have thought her dad was being overprotective with his rules. The next day, on April 12th, Jamie got up, put on a pink shirt, and went to school. She was looking forward to visiting with her mom, Jennifer, in a few days. Jennifer hadn't seen Jamie since February, but they had plans to go Easter egg hunting over the upcoming holiday weekend. Best friend Carissa said they talked during 6th period, and that Jamie seemed kind of happy. Dad's workday ended after the school day, so she usually spent a few hours alone in the afternoon. She stopped at the local library after school and played with a friend there for a little while. When she got home, she realized she'd left her keys at school. To make the trip quickly, she rode her bike to school, grabbed her keys, then biked back home. It was a hot day, and all the effort had made her sweaty, so she changed into a blue short-sleeved shirt and came back down to the breezeway. After that, she and her bicycle disappeared. Her father, Curtis, arrived home from work and couldn't find her. He got worried. He asked several neighbors if they had seen her. He also asked Tim, the apartment manager, if he had saw her. He had not. Tim volunteered to help look for her, and the two knocked on doors asking if anyone had seen Jamie. At about 6 p.m., they knocked on Kevin's door. Tim said it took a long time for Kevin to answer. When he opened the door, he was still buttoning up his shirt like he had just put it on. Kevin said he had seen Jamie riding her bike outside earlier, but didn't know where she went. He stayed outside for a while, telling Curtis that he'd keep watch in case she came home while he was out searching. Around 8 p.m., he told Curtis and Tim that he was tired and had to work early in the morning, implying that he was headed for bed. After searching the complex and finding no sign of his daughter, Curtis reported her missing to the police. Since there was no evidence indicating that she had been abducted, police initially assumed the 10-year-old had run away, or that they'd find her hiding with a friend or somewhere nearby. They gathered a team of police, firefighters, and volunteers to look for her, however. Meanwhile, Curtis called his relatives, including his brother Mark and his wife Linda. They came to the apartment complex to help search for Jamie and stayed with Curtis once he called the police. The family gathered in the breezeway outside while they waited for news. Linda said, Kevin stopped by to talk to Jamie's father several times and expressed his concerns to family. Curtis also called Jamie's mom Jennifer, catching her on the road in Arizona hauling a load of produce. She was driving 75 miles per hour when the phone rang, and she didn't even remember pulling over. She said, before she realized what was happening, she said her truck was shoulder and half on the road. She rushed to Purcell as soon as she could. Her plans of a happy Easter visit totally shattered. Jamie was still missing after a day spent searching for her, so officers issued an Amber Alert on Thursday night, and the FBI joined the investigation. One of their first working theories was that Jamie had met a man online, and that person might have convinced her to bike somewhere to meet him, but they had no sign of her bike anywhere either. On Friday, the FBI still had no leads. Following their child abduction response plan, agents set up 4 roadblocks and checkpoints on roads leading to the apartment complex at around the same time of the day they thought Jamie had gone missing. Since many people drive the same route home from work every day, they were hoping one of the motorists they stopped might have seen something that would give them a clue about what happened to her. Kevin's dad was driving Kevin home after work when Agent Craig Overby stopped his truck at one of the roadblocks. Kevin's dad mentioned that they knew the little girl was missing, and that Kevin was her neighbor. Overby asked if Kevin would come talk to him in his patrol car. The FBI agent was soon convinced Kevin knew more than any other suspect he had talked to. During their conversation, Kevin pointed out that the Amber Alert on the news was wrong. It said she was wearing a pink shirt. When he had seen Jamie riding her bike that afternoon, he said she was wearing a short-sleeved blue shirt. This meant he had to have been one of the last people to have seen her before she went missing. The agent told Kevin he wasn't under arrest, but he was a very important witness, and asked if he could come to the police station a few blocks away to give a more complete statement. Kevin agreed. During the interview, he insisted he couldn't have been involved in her disappearance, telling detectives I could never hurt her. She reminds me of my sister. After talking for about an hour, Agent Overby drove Kevin back to his apartment and asked if he and the other agents could look around. Hoping to look innocent, Kevin agreed. Inside, they noticed what looked like blood in the bathtub, so they continued to search. They found a large gray plastic container in the back of Kevin's bedroom closet that looked suspicious because it was sealed with duct tape. When Agent Overby asked him what was inside, Kevin told him it was full of comic books, and he used the tape to keep the moisture out. The agent pulled up a corner of the tape and opened the container enough to see a blue shirt like the one Jamie had been wearing when she went missing. When the agent said he saw clothes inside, Kevin blurted out, "Go ahead and arrest me." The agent then asked Kevin, "Where is she?" To which he replied, "She's in there. I hit her and I chopped her up." Now inside the container beneath her blue shirt, they found her. They arrested Kevin and obtained a search warrant so they could look for additional evidence. As they led him from the apartment, Kevin said, "I'm going to burn in hell." After a more extensive search, they found the frame and back wheel of Jamie's bike shoved under Kevin's bed, and the rest of it in a duffel bag in his walk-in closet. In the same closet, they found a bag of adult toys and videos, along with a Barbie doll head with nails through its eyes. They found a hacksaw, a decorative dagger, and other knives and swords, and several rolls of duct tape. They found a DVD box set of an A&E documentary about serial killers, and a mug that they believed Jamie had brought with her. Kevin's computer was seized to search it for digital evidence. They also found a wooden cutting board, barbecue skewers, and meat tenderizing powder. But those items wouldn't make sense until agents talked to Kevin some more. After his arrest, Kevin asked to talk to Agent Overby again, and after making sure that Kevin properly waived his Miranda rights, the agent spoke to Kevin for several hours, during which he made a full and very disturbing confession. Kevin told agents that he had been planning to kidnap someone for a couple of months. He'd been interested in and fantasizing about cannibalism for at least a year. When he started taking his Lexapro again, his fantasies really ramped up. He started to act on them. He said he wanted to know what human flesh tasted like, and thinking about it aroused him. He was so focused on the idea that he began downloading crime scene photos of dead bodies to fuel his fantasies. According to what he called his original plan, he wanted to grab a local child, restrain them, and make them watch an adult movie with him. He even considered that he might have to explain what was happening in the movie since the child might not understand, but he thought that he could teach them. After the movie, he planned to assay, torture, murder, sleep next to the dead victim, and then finally eat them, leaving only bones to dispose of. In preparation, sometime in March, he purchased the hacksaw, the meat tenderizing powder, and the barbecue skewers. He found one of the heaviest items in his home, a solid wood cutting board, and brought it into the living room in case he needed to use it as a weapon. He also ripped off a length of duct tape and stuck one end to his entertainment system, letting the rest of it dangle so he could easily grab it. He knew what he wanted to do. He had not settled on a target yet. He admitted he would stand outside and look at the neighborhood kids, considering them as possible victims. Now, he said that he did not identify as a pedophile, but he thought kidnapping a child would be easier because he could more easily overpower someone smaller. He said, "I kind of planned all along to probably get a kid, just mainly because they'd be easier to grab and easier to get rid of afterwards. Smaller and, put up less of a fight." This is a direct quote. He had his eye on a 5-year-old neighbor boy, at least one adult woman, and Jamie. On a few occasions, he almost went through with an abduction, but he said he became too excited. Afterwards, he said he felt sick and questioned what he was thinking. He told the agent, "I'd just be hit with disgust. I mean, like, my God, what am I thinking about? You can't do that. It's horrible." When asked about Jamie, Kevin told Agent Overby that he didn't know her by name, but had talked to her on several occasions. He said, "Well, I did kind of favor this girl a little. I had seen her and I was kind of like, well, I really like her. But then as I saw her more and more, I'd think, no, I can't hurt her. She's nice and I know her too well." Kevin told the agent he had spent most of the day of April 12th with his family. He had taken his laundry over to his parents' house, and his mom washed his clothes while he ran some errands. Stayed until his sister got home from school to help her with some of her homework before heading back to the Purcell apartments. When he got home, he messaged his Melissa several times with the last message sent at 2:54 p.m. At around 3:30 p.m., he noticed that Jamie's bike was gone, and he was slightly disappointed. If he was going to abduct her, he wanted to grab her when she got home from school, so it looked like she never made it home, and he felt like he missed his chance to do so. Just a few minutes later, she returned on her bike and told him she'd forgotten her keys, and they talked briefly about the weather. She said it seemed to get hotter in Purcell than it did in Dibble, where she grew up. She went upstairs to her apartment, changed her shirt, and poured herself a cup of iced milk. She came back down to the breezeway for a few minutes, and they talked a little bit more. While she was making small talk about how refreshing iced milk was on a hot day, Kevin noticed that she hadn't locked her bike up and thought if he hit it, then he could make it look like she had been grabbed by a stranger while riding her bike. After a few more minutes of chatting, Kevin said she asked to come inside and see his rat. Once inside his apartment, she sat down on the floor next to the rat's cage. An episode of SpongeBob came on the TV, and they watched it together, talking a little bit about the show. He said that she was in there watching TV for about 15 minutes while he debated putting his plan into action. He decided it would be better to knock her unconscious before restraining her, so he picked up the heavy wooden cutting board, but still hesitated. Over the next 5 minutes, he said he picked up the board and put it down several times. He finally decided to act and smashed her on the head, but it didn't work right away like it had in his fantasy. After his first blow, she jumped up and said, "I'm sorry." Later, he told detectives that something that's, haunted me forever since it happened. She started yelling, "I'm sorry," which, I'm like, what is she sorry for? She didn't do anything wrong. It's me, I'm the one that should be sorry. She tried to run away, and he hit her again. She started screaming, "Oh God, I'm sorry," and told him, "Let me go, I won't tell." He hit her 3 to 4 times with the cutting board, while Jamie fought for her life and refused to go down. He dropped the cutting board and grabbed her from behind, clamping his hand over her mouth and nose. He forced her to the ground until she was on the floor and her stomach pinned beneath his weight. Kevin thought he had killed her. When he loosened his grip, she tried to grab something from a nearby toolbox, and he had to trap her against the ground again. She went limp, and he held her that way for several more minutes. He turned her over on her back to make sure she was really gone, but 30 seconds later, she started breathing again, and he said he had to do it again. After holding her pinned for 5 more minutes, she went limp again and lost control of her bladder. He thought she was dead, but to make sure he covered her mouth and nose with duct tape. Then he dragged her into his bedroom to hide her from view, so he could go outside to grab her bike, which he then wheeled inside of his walk-in closet. Back inside, Kevin essayed Jamie, but said the position she was in made it difficult to do what he wanted to do. Now, in his original plan, he had wanted to drain the blood from his victim while they were still alive, like a butchered animal, so he dragged Jamie into the bathroom. In his imagination, Kevin was able to move his victim with ease, but in reality, the 110-pound dead weight was too heavy for him. After much struggle, he was able to drape her over the edge of the tub. He pulled her hair back in a rubber band to keep it clean, and then used the decorative dagger to cut her neck, but he was unable to sever her spine. He planned to collect the blood in a large white bowl, but he said the blood was already clotted, and it didn't look appetizing to him in that condition, so he tried to wash it down the drain. Leaving Jamie in the bathroom, Kevin went to his computer to message his friend Melissa at 4:08 p.m. He didn't tell her what he had done, but she said that he seemed significantly happier than he had been in a long time during their conversation. He also deleted the adult images in his collection of crime scene photos from the computer in case the police searched it. A little before 5 p.m., he saw Jamie's dad Curtis arrive home from work. Kevin watched as Curtis walked around looking for Jamie. With no sign of her near the apartment, Curtis jumped in his truck and drove around looking for her. Inside his apartment, Kevin wanted to move her from the bathroom into his bed, but she was still bleeding too much and her stomach contents were now leaking from her neck. He was worried that the smell of blood and vomit would travel outside his apartment, so he lit incense to cover up the scent. He also poured cleaners down his drain because he was afraid the clotted blood would back up the lines, possibly sending bloody water into nearby apartments. When apartment manager Tim and Curtis knocked on the door, Kevin made sure the bathroom door was closed tight. He got dressed and went outside to talk to them. Later, he told the FBI that he talked to Curtis on purpose, so that no one would expect he had anything to do with Jamie's disappearance. He stayed outside pretending to look for Jamie until about 8 p.m. and made an excuse to go back inside his apartment. He tried again to move her, but there was still so much blood. He was disappointed that the reality didn't match his fantasy. He told detectives, "At this point, I was just disgusted. I was like, God, this mess. I guess I was already pretty upset. I can't believe this. I wish I hadn't did it. I wish I could take it back." He laid her on a tarp, wrapped her up in it, and covered the bundle with large black trash bags. He then put her in the large gray tub, along with her clothes and a towel to soak up the blood. He taped the container closed and shoved it in his closet. He also took apart her bike and hid the pieces under his bed in a large duffel bag. The next day, he messaged Melissa, and he told her he had a difficult 24 hours. He didn't want the police to come and search his apartment. He must have thought he'd done a good job of cleaning up because he agreed to a search later that day. After his arrest, agents waited until Jamie's family had gone inside before walking the handcuffed Kevin to a nearby patrol car. Kevin was held without bond in the McLean County Jail on the charge of first-degree murder. Because there was so much media coverage, the trial was moved from McLean County to Cleveland County with the hope that they would find impartial jurors there. At the time of the crime, District Attorney Tim Kuykendall had been working as a prosecutor for 24 years, and he was horrified by Kevin's actions. He said, "I've never seen a homicide quite as atrocious and heinous and cruel as what this little girl suffered. This does not appear to be a spur-of-the-moment crime of opportunity, but a well-thought-out premeditated act with months of planning and preparation." He thought Kevin should get the death penalty and was determined to take him to trial. However, D.A. Kuykendall lost his election in 2006, and he was replaced by Greg Mashburn. The new DA considered offering a plea deal but ultimately agreed with his predecessor. This crime was so terrible that Kevin had to pay with his life. His jury trial began on February 19, 2008, and it was presided over by Judge Candace Blaylock. At the trial, the autopsy report was presented by forensic pathologist Inez Yacoub. He testified that Jamie's official cause of death was asphyxiation and blunt force trauma to the head, and her manner of death was homicide. He detailed the many injuries that she bruises on the back of her head consistent with the blows Kevin had described. She had petechia, which are burst blood vessels in her eyes, consistent with being suffocated and unable to breathe. He found curved marks on her face caused by a hand being held over her mouth and nose, and deep saw marks on her neck from attempted decapitation. Doctors also found evidence of trauma to her private parts, including a torn hymen. Doctors were not able to tell whether Jamie was still alive when the essay occurred. Though this evidence alone would likely have been enough to convict him, prosecutors also had something much more damning. Almost 2 hours of a videotaped interview during which Kevin described everything he had planned and done in a step-by-step, matter-of-fact way. This interview, conducted by agents Martin Magg and Craig Overby, was played for the jury. On the tape, Agent Overby stayed calm and allowed Kevin to talk. We reworked to build a rapport with Kevin, asking him about his job and his family, and telling Kevin he was intelligent. As Kevin was comfortable, Agent Overby told him, "At some point you realize you had to do the right thing and tell what happened." At first, Kevin seemed hesitant and had to be prompted with questions. Once he started talking about his plan, he seemed eager to talk. He even seemed excited at times. He told the agents about his addiction to adult films and images, and explained how his desires had gotten so morbid. He said he had spent the last 12 to 13 years surfing the internet for bizarre adult material. He said, "There's a lot of weird stuff on the internet. So as the years went by, I just got desensitized to normal porn. I had to keep going after harder and harder core stuff until it finally got to this cannibalism point." He told the agents he had spent months forming a plan to kidnap someone from the neighborhood, most likely a child. He said, "While they were still alive and gagged, I was going to drape them over the bathtub and cut off their head, and then hang them and let the body all drain out. I was going to keep the body around for a couple of days. I was going to set the head on my desk, so it could watch me and keep the corpse in my bed, sleeping with it, having sex with it for a day or two. And then I was going to start butchering them and cooking them." He told the agents what he bought as part of the plan, and sometimes even remembered where he bought it. He got the plastic tarp and large container at Walmart, planned to use the tarp to cover the couch while he essayed his victim, and cover his bed while he slept with them at night. Bought a hacksaw to cut open the head because he wanted to eat the brain. He bought barbecue skewers because he wanted to stick them through the cheeks and eyes of his victim. He even told them where to find the Barbie doll head he practiced that technique on. He bought the meat tenderizer powder so he could eat every part of the body, including the organs. Kevin didn't seem ashamed of his actions, but he knew his mother and sister would be devastated when they found out what he did. He knew what he had done was wrong, but he also blamed Jamie for becoming his victim. He said, "She was a very trusting kid that if it hadn't been me, it could have ended up being someone else. 'Cause like I said, she just kind of wandered into my apartment. I didn't, force her in there or even ask her in." At the end of the video, he threw up violently into the room's trash can, which could have been a sign of remorse or a sign of fear because he had gotten caught and was going to jail. Following the video testimony, the defense arrested without calling any witnesses. After hearing Kevin say, "I know what I did was wrong and I know I deserve to be punished for it," there wasn't much for his lawyers to say. They didn't even try to prove he was innocent. Their only argument was he should be given life without the possibility of parole because he had mental illness and other mitigating circumstances. On February 28, 2008, the jury took only 23 minutes to get Kevin a first-degree murder, and on March 7th, the same jury sentenced him to death by lethal injection. Kevin showed no emotion when he found out he'd be put to death. Prosecutor Greg Mashburn called the trial a particularly troubling case to sit through. We would agree after the conviction, he was glad he no longer needed to keep the evidence in his office and instead put the crime scene photos, toys, and weapons into storage. He said, "I don't have to stare at that disgusting stuff that jurors had to look at anymore." His family was relieved, but also prepared for the long appeals process that usually occurs in a death penalty case. Her Aunt Linda said, "We know that's going to happen. This does create a lot of closure for us that we don't have to come back for trial and don't have to sit in the courtroom with him." July of 2016, Kevin appealed the death penalty. This appeal, he had a new reason. This trial, he had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and several other mental illnesses, but his appeal was rejected. That judge noted in his ruling that Jamie's murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Despite losing his appeal, Kevin stayed on death row for many more years because the state of Oklahoma wasn't very good at executing people. Now, this is not my opinion. This is just what happened, and let me explain to you why. Now, in 2014, after Kevin was found guilty, but before his appeal process was done, the execution of another convicted murderer in Oklahoma went horribly wrong. Clayton Lockett, who had shot a 19-year-old woman and buried her alive, was given an untested combination of drugs for his lethal injection. Though he was supposed to be unconscious and paralyzed during the procedure, the drugs didn't work. He moaned, moved around, and tried to get up, and he had to be held down on the table. When the doctor tried to place another line to give him more lethal drugs, he accidentally hit an artery, and the blood sprayed all over the execution room. The execution was stopped, but Clayton died 43 minutes later, and in 2015, Oklahoma had another issue carrying out an execution. They used the wrong drug to execute Charles Warner, who had essayed and murdered the 11-month-old daughter of his girlfriend. Potassium chloride was the drug that they were supposed to use and what was logged in the paperwork, but potassium acetate was found in an autopsy of his body. His final words were, "My body is on fire." After these mistakes, the state placed a 6-year moratorium on executions. They lifted the moratorium in 2021, and there was political pressure to quickly resume executions. A plan was established to execute 25 prisoners in the following 3 years, which would reduce the population of Oklahoma's death row by 58%. Since then, Oklahoma has executed 13 people, but the Department of Corrections has struggled to keep up with the pace. Kevin was scheduled for execution on December 7, 2023, but it was put on hold when prison staff asked to delay the time between executions from 60 days to 90 days. They claimed they needed time to avoid another botched execution. Oklahoma Attorney General Jenna Drummond supported the department's request. He said, "I do not want as a chief law officer to oversee a failed execution. I am present with every execution. I look the defendant in the eye as he dies. I look the men and women that administer those lethal injections in the eye after they've administered it, and I have sympathy for the strain on them." The judge overseeing the case had a very different opinion. He said they needed to suck it up and do the job they were hired to do. The time between executions was already extended from 30 to 60 days, and he rejected the new request to extend it to 90 days. He said, "We set a reasonable amount of time to start this out, and y'all keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. Who's to say next month you won't come in and say I need 120 days? This stuff needs to stop, and people need to suck it up, realize they have a hard job to do, and get it done in a timely, proficient, professional way." While they battle it out in court, Kevin is still incarcerated at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. His new execution date has not been set as of the time of this recording. When officers told Curtis his daughter was dead, he collapsed in grief and despair. His brother Mark had to take him to the hospital where they sedated him. Family realized she'd been dead inside Kevin's apartment the whole time they'd been sitting outside just a few feet away. Jamie's Aunt Linda told reporters that their family was distraught and trying to come to terms with an immense loss. She said, "That guy took a life that had just begun. Her daddy is not going to walk her down the aisle. She's not going to have babies. She's not going to get married. I mean, it's over for her. This guy is sitting all cozy in a jail cell eating dinner right now, and that's the reality of it." The family was grateful to the police and investigators who found their girl, but they struggled with horrible details of the crime. Jamie's Uncle Mark said it was hard to hear what happened to her. He said, "Sometimes it got to the point where it hurt. This has been very, very rough on all of us. We're in the process of grieving. It's really hard on everybody. Whole communities struggled with the loss. Townspeople left balloons, flowers and stuffed animals and Easter cards at the apartment complex, and her school friends tied white ribbons to the trees on the street near the high school in her memory. Her funeral was held at the Purcell High School Gymnasium, one of the few places in the small town large enough to hold everyone who attended. Over 1,000 people joined her family at the service on April 20th to mourn her death, including members of her Girl Scout troop and officers and other first responders who searched for her. So many people came out to say goodbye that police closed off the roads in the surrounding 2 square blocks and arranged for golf carts to drive people from their parking areas to the gym. Dozens of balloons in her favorite color, green, hung behind her closed white casket, and a framed photo of Jamie sat on top next to a bouquet of flowers. They played her favorite song, "Jesus Take the Wheel," and other country music that she liked. They showed a video of images and clips from her life, including time she spent having fun with her fellow Girl Scouts. Pastor Dwayne Elmore spoke saying, "Long after the cameras are gone and the headlines change, there will still be people in Purcell who love you." After the public service, she was taken the 60 miles to Guthrie in a white hearse, and her family had a smaller, private service at her graveside in Summit View Cemetery. Without his little girl, Curtis couldn't just stay in Purcell. He got a new job and moved to Guthrie. For a long time, he didn't know how to keep on living without her, but eventually he realized Jamie wouldn't want him to feel that way. He said, "I know she'd want me to go on." Curtis said he looked forward to reuniting with his daughter in heaven. "When that happens," he said, "I'll probably just give her a big old hug and tell her I miss her." Her aunt Tania Leib said she tries to remember the good times. She said, "I don't want her to fade away. She's part of history and want people to know that she really did exist." Her mother, Jennifer, went through dark times after her daughter's murder. She'd always dreamt of being a truck driver, but because of that dream, she ended up blaming herself for Jamie's death. She thought she should have been home with Jamie instead of out on the road. She told a reporter, "I think about her all the time. To be honest, there's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't think about her." She was a year sober when Jamie died, but she soon fell off the wagon, and it would be years before she got clean again. During her darkest time, she said, "Basically, I lost it. I called my mom up and I said, 'Mom, I want to be with Jamie. I want to go where she's at. She needs me. And that's selfish of me to think that way, because I've got 2 other girls I've got to stay here for.'" As the years passed, Jamie's mom posted messages on her memorial pages, the way to talk to her after she was gone. Jennifer took comfort in thinking about Jamie surrounded by other relatives that had passed and imagined her little girl all grown up. In February of 2014, she posted the following message. "To my sweet Jamie, I love and miss you so very much. With every angel date, birthday and holiday that passes, I go see you. When a breeze blows through my hair, I say hello, Coppertop. I miss you so very much. I catch myself imagining what you would be like and look like now. I know you would be a gorgeous, loving, charismatic young lady." In May of 2020, she posted, "Hey Coppertop, been thinking about you so much lately. Grandma Rose, Aunt Chris and Gigi are there with you now. I know you are all happy. Just know we miss you all and love you very much. Love always, Mommy." That was the last message Jennifer left for her daughter. On October 11th, 2023, Jennifer passed away. She was buried at Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, next to her baby girl. Case 5. This is 32-year-old Chad Dorman, just minutes after executing his 3 young sons, 7-year-old Clayton, 4-year-old Hunter, and 3-year-old Chase. You've likely seen this case in the news recently. The boys were murdered just 1 year ago, and Chad pled guilty on August 3rd, 2024. So who is this monster, and how did his family end up at the center of a horrific slaughter? Well, if you ask anyone in Chad's life prior to June 15th, 2023, including his wife, Laura, he wasn't a monster. Chad and Laura lived in Monroe Township, Ohio. This is a suburb of Cincinnati, with about 7,500 residents at the time of the 2020 census. Monroe Township is east of Cincinnati, right on the Ohio-Kentucky border. It's best known for its large fireworks display on Independence Day. Chad, Laura, and their 4 children lived together at 1965 Laurel Lindale Road. Their modest home sat on 3 acres of land and cost about $70,000 when they purchased it in 2016. This would have been right around the time that their oldest child, Clayton, was born. It is unclear when Chad and Laura were married, but one source noted that Chad had been in the life of Laura's daughter since a very young age. There had been about 7 at the time that they bought their home together. Their house was a home clearly set up for a gaggle of happy children with a trampoline and an above-ground pool in their yard. The family had a small camper parked outside their home, suggesting that they enjoyed spending time outdoors together. There were toys and tricycles strewn all across the yard. The family all loved baseball, and neighbors would regularly see them all outside playing together. In fact, Chad coached the baseball team for his oldest son, Clayton. Boys also loved to drive around their yard in go-karts, or help their dad fix his car. In the summer of 2023, Laura's daughter had just finished 8th grade and would soon be a freshman at the new Richmond High School. Her brother, Clayton, had been enrolled in kindergarten earlier that year, but had been withdrawn for reasons that are unclear. At 7 years old, Clayton was already an avid baseball player. But he didn't just love sports. He also loved Legos, he was super funny, and he loved to joke around. He was also incredibly kind and loved to give gifts to people that were important to him in his life. He loved to sing, and his dog, Gatlin, was his best friend. Clayton's younger brother, Hunter, was 4 years old. He was also obsessed with baseball. He loved catching frogs at the creek and adored his mom and sister. They said that every day he would call them pretty girls. And then there was Chase, just 3 years old. He loved dinosaurs and watching his brothers play baseball. As the youngest, he was also the snuggle bug of the family and loved to cuddle with his mom. A friend of the family remembered that the boys were like a little pack, always doing everything together. Chad had grown up in the same area that he stayed to raise his family as an adult. He went to Amelia High School, and based on his age, we guess he would have graduated around 2009 or 2010. Amelia High School has since closed and was replaced by West Claremont High School. At the time of our story, Chad had a pretty clean criminal record. He had a few traffic violations and one dismissed charge from 2010. He had been charged with DV against his father, Keith Dorman, after allegedly choking him. Those charges were later dropped, and his dad said it was just a misunderstanding. There was no record of any DV reports between Chad and Laura, or any disturbances whatsoever that involved the police at their address. Chad was now a family man who appeared to be working construction. He was a member of the Insulators Union, so we assume he was installing insulation as part of a crew. There would later be mixed reports of Chad's general personality, temperament, and behavior prior to the murders. Chad's father, Keith, described him as a super dad, always laughing and joking with his boys or herself, so that nothing would have made her believe that Chad was capable of harming them. However, neighbors in the area said they often heard the parents fighting. One neighbor said he was angry every single day, always shouting at his wife and kids. Another friend of Chad's claimed that he had a temper like a bomb, just waiting to explode. Prior to the additional information being released after Chad pled guilty, there was some speculation that perhaps Laura was attempting to leave Chad. Some sources said that Laura had spoken to her daughter a few months prior about his temper. Among those sources, she acknowledged that Chad was causing problems with the neighbors while he was drunk. If his drinking continued, she would have to divorce him. Some even speculated that he returned home that day to find her attempting to leave, which is what triggered the incident. But there is not any current evidence confirming either of those theories at this time. In fact, according to the report released by the prosecution on August 5, 2024, there was no abnormal behavior in the week prior to the incident that would have been a warning sign about what was going to happen. It's also important to note that the town Chad lived in was already on high alert for suspicious behavior. In early 2023, there had been another shooting in Monroe Township. At the end of February, a local woman had shot her husband, her father, and her 14-year-old son and her 20-year-old daughter. She then removed herself from the earth. Apparently, the family was facing eviction due to financial hardship. Her daughter survived the family annihilation attempt, and the town was still reeling from this tragedy in June when our story takes place. Now, this case was stressful enough to research. If you're feeling the same about listening to it, then let's take a little break to unwind with a game we've been using to blow off steam lately. This video has been brought to you by Screw Jam, a challenging puzzle game where you remove and match screws to progress through levels, testing your problem-solving and strategic thinking skills. Screw Jam is easy to learn but hard to master. Enjoy exciting in-game events where you complete levels, earn points, and unlock rewards like boosters, coins, and hearts. If you're seeking satisfying challenges, brain-teasing fun, or the enhancement of cognitive skills, Screw Jam provides it all for everyone who loves a puzzle-solving game. Engage in a blend of puzzle solving and strategy. Each level tests attention to detail and strategic thinking. It's a great time. Best of all, Screw Jam is free to download and no Wi-Fi is needed, so you can play Screw Jam when you're at the beach or even on a plane. If you download Screw Jam using the link or by scanning the QR code, you will receive 3 hours of infinite life and 100 coins. With a rating of 4.7 on the App Store, you're bound to love it. Download Screw Jam now and dive into a brain-teasing journey. Challenge yourself and sharpen your strategic thinking skills while having fun. Click the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen. Thanks, and back to the episode. On Saturday, June 10th, 2023, 5 days prior to the incident, the family seemed to have a very normal, even fun day. Chad took his boys to a local dirt track to watch some races. Since he was having a boys' day, he encouraged Laura and her daughter to go shopping and have their own girls' day. The following day, he took the boys fishing. Chad would later claim that he was struggling to sleep all through the week. However, Laura did not recall any challenges with sleep or changes of behavior during those days. On Monday, he went to work as normal. His co-workers and direct supervisor were interviewed and attested that there was nothing strange about his behavior that day. The same was said about Tuesday, June 13th. Chad went to work as normal and returned home that night to fix the headlight on his vehicle. The first indication of strange behavior came on the morning of Wednesday, June 14th. Chad was a very early riser, often getting up around 4 a.m. to get ready for work. On that day, he woke up his stepdaughter before he left. This was very strange, as typically he would not wake anyone before work. He woke her up and apologized to her. He said he was sorry for, and I quote, "anything I have ever done to hurt you." It is unclear if she relayed this interaction to anyone else in the households. Chad left for work after that and continued to have another normal day. After work, he coached Clayton's baseball team during a game. The whole family came to watch Clayton and Chad on the field. Some observers would later note that he seemed a little distracted that night, but nothing was alarming enough to follow up on. On Thursday, June 15th, Chad got up and went to work as normal. Arriving around 7 a.m., phone records would later show that on his way to work, he searched for a song called Happy in Hell by Colt Ford. The song talks about living with the devil while being in love with someone other than their partner. It reflects on a feeling of getting boxed in, feeling confused and hopeless. That morning, Chad's boss noticed that he was acting strangely, but not strange enough to make him call the police or even to Laura to see if everything was okay. However, Chad ended up leaving work around 9:30 a.m. It's unclear if this was approved by his boss or if he just left unannounced. At some point that morning, he called his mother to say he was having confusing thoughts, as he put it. She suggested that he go to the little clinic inside their Kroger. For those of you who do not have that chain near you, Kroger is a grocery store, but like many supermarkets, they have a pharmacy with a clinic inside. At 9:42 a.m., Chad arrived at the Kroger. He entered the building and stopped in the vitamin and supplement aisle and stared at the shelves for a few minutes, then walked into the little clinic and leaned on the counter where a receptionist would typically be. From the camera footage we have seen, it appears that the clinic is empty. There is no one waiting in chairs and no one at the desk. Chad leans on the counter for just over a minute and a half. After no one comes to speak to him, he turns around and leaves the store without making any purchases or speaking to anyone. It seems that he stopped one more time on the way home to buy a 16-ounce Bud Light, but it's not known where he made that stop. When he first arrived home, his family was out running errands. Chad went to the shed, but it's unclear exactly what he was doing. Laura and the kids arrived home shortly after, and the boys ran excitedly to greet their dad, who they probably didn't expect to be home on a Thursday morning. Laura later said that Chad played with his boys for the rest of the morning, and she made lunch for everyone. While they ate, Laura observed the first major red flag. While he was eating, Chad said, "This will be my last good meal." Laura was concerned by this statement and thought Chad might be planning to remove himself from this earth. After lunch, Chad called his father and spoke to him on the phone for just a few minutes. It's unclear what the general nature or context of the call was. However, he has been quoted as saying, "Clayton is going to be the hardest at some point." After the phone call, Chad seemed to be stable. He spent the next few hours doing yard work and playing with the kids. At 3:30, Laura once again noticed strange behavior. Chad began reading the Bible to 4-year-old Hunter. He then began walking around the house with the Bible in hand, saying, "Chad knows what's right." In initial reports, Laura said Chad accessed the gun safe in their bedroom around this time. She told him that he was scaring her, but Chad assured her he was just joking around. She then tried to get him to take a nap, not wanting him to be alone in case he was planning to remove himself from this earth. She and the 3 boys laid down with him in the bed. While they all laid together, Chad told his sons that they were the best boys and that they had done nothing wrong. Soon after laying down, Chad jumped up and went back to the gun safe and pulled out his .22 caliber rifle, which made everyone start screaming. Laura, who thought that his intended target was himself, began pleading with him not to do it, telling him that they loved him. She pulled out her phone to call 911 to get him help, but he ripped the phone from her hand and threw it across the room, telling her that it was too late. This mayhem must have gotten the attention of Laura's daughter, who was watching TV in the other room. She walked to the master bedroom, just in time to see her stepfather shoot Hunter 4 times in front of the whole family. Hunter was hit in the right arm, right side of his torso, and twice on the right side of his head. Laura started screaming for the other kids to run, and then grabbed her phone and called 911. During the call, Laura is screaming and frantic, trying to say her address to the operator, but she said it so fast that they could not hear it clearly. She was screaming, "My husband shot my baby. Help me, God, help me. He's hurt. He's hurt, God. He's hurt. Chase, come on, bud. Run." Followed by lots of screaming, and "My baby's dead. My baby's dead. Don't shoot him." You can hear Chad tell her to get off of him as she is fighting him. She kept screaming her address while the kids screamed in the background. "Chase, come on, bud. Run." And Laura yelled at Chad, "My baby is dead, Chad. My baby's dead. Don't shoot him." As the call continues, there was more screaming in the background between Laura and a small child. While Laura was on the phone with 911, Clayton and his older sister ran out the back door of the house, then in opposite directions. Clayton ran towards a field behind the house. Once Clayton ran, Chad began to pursue him. A few seconds later, after getting out of the house, Laura's daughter turned and saw Chad raising his gun to take aim at Clayton. The 14-year-old stopped fleeing and instead ran straight toward Chad to try to stop him. Chad shot Clayton twice in the back from about 70 yards away. Mate and Clayton dropped to the ground before his sister was able to reach him. He then calmly walked over to his 7-year-old son, and when he reached him, he shot him twice more in the head, killing him. When Chad started shooting Clayton, the teenager changed course and went to find Chase. At this point, Laura had carried Hunter out of the house to wait for EMTs, all while trying to render aid to her little boy. Chase's sister found him, picked him up, and started running down the driveway towards the fire station that was across the intersection from their house. Fortunately, Chad saw them fleeing and quickly caught up. On a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera, police were able to find the audio of this moment. Chad was pointing the gun at his stepdaughter's head from point-blank range, screaming, "Don't shoot me, don't shoot me." Chad demanded that she put Chase down. She lowered the boy to the ground, and he began to run. Chad followed him to where he was hiding behind their trash cans and attempted to shoot him. The gun was out of bullets, so Chad had to stop to reload. This delay gave the 14-year-old time to flee into the street towards the firehouse. Fortunately, the 3-year-old fled back toward his house and his mother, looking for safety. She managed to flag down a vehicle and screamed that her stepdad was killing everyone. Afterwards, she continued to run to the fire station as the bystander made another 911 call. Meanwhile, Chad turned and went back to the house, where he found Laura holding Chase. There, a struggle ensued, with Chad trying to pull their youngest son from her arms. Laura fought back hard as Chad bit her. She put her hand on the barrel of the gun, pushing it away from her baby. As she pushed it, her thumb covered the end of the barrel, and Chad pulled the trigger. The bullet hit her thumb, and the shock was enough of a distraction for Chad to pull the toddler from her arms, and then shot him in the head, executing him right in front of his mother. You may never know why Chad did not attempt to kill Laura at this point, or attempt to remove himself from the earth. She was suffering from her own gunshot wound. Laura managed to get a hold of her phone and called 911 again. She ran back out of the house to Hunter's body to attempt to resuscitate him. In a 911 call, she is once again hysterical and screaming, likely from her own physical pain, as well as the horror of what just happened. In the call, you can make out phrases like, "My children are shot," "My children are not breathing, my 3 children," and also, "I called and no one came, their father killed them." During the call, the operator attempts to calm her down to give her instructions on how to do CPR. During this time frame, Chad was calmly walking around the property, collecting the bodies of his children. He first went back to the field and picked up Clayton, throwing his body over his shoulder, and carrying him back to the side yard where Laura was attempting to save Hunter. Chad laid him on the ground next to his wife and child, and walked back into the house to get Chase, with a large spot of Clayton's blood on the back of his green t-shirt. Then brought Chase's body outside, and laid him next to Clayton in the grass. The bodies of his dead sons lined up in the yard. He calmly returned to the front steps, laid his rifle down next to him, and lit a cigarette to wait for the police. Deputies arrived at 4:26 p.m. For our listeners who live in urban areas, this 20-minute response time may seem unacceptable. We'd like to point out that in more rural towns that do not have their own full-time police departments, when you call the police, the only officers available to respond are the county sheriffs. The sheriffs would be dispatched to anywhere in the county when they receive a call like this. You can see in the body cam footage that these officers started driving as soon as the call came in, speeding with lights and sirens the whole way. They were also speeding directly into an active shooter situation. When the deputies first arrived, they needed to assess how to safely get to the children and Chad without putting their own lives at risk. In the body cam footage, you can hear an officer asking to go to the boys laying in the grass because he knew they needed help. However, they didn't have Chad in custody yet and didn't know where his gun was. They could see Chad sitting on the steps, but he did not respond to them. They were yelling from the side of the road, "Walk toward us," but Chad didn't follow the instructions. After seeing that he wasn't going to come to them, they crossed the lawn while maintaining cover behind the camper parked in the driveway. As they approached, they continued to yell directions to Chad to stand up, but Chad remained sitting on the steps. When they reached Chad, he did not resist as they pulled him from the steps, pushed him to the ground, and cuffed him. The other police raced to the bodies of the boys as Laura screamed at Chad in the background, "You took my life from me." The family dog was barking from inside the house, and Chad yelled at him to stop. He then calmly told the officers not to let him out, and that he didn't think the dog would bite them as long as they left him alone. While Chad was face down and cuffed, an officer asked him what was going on. He said, "I'm not trying to hurt nobody. I'm completely sober. I've never done drugs a day in my life." Then shortly after he said, "I ain't gonna hurt nobody. I ain't got nothing on me. Just my phone, that's it. I ain't mad. I ain't nothing." As you saw from the beginning of the episode, Chad asked if he could be rolled over because he was uncomfortable, after which the officers stood him up and began walking him away from the crime scene. The officer who initially cuffed Chad handed him to Deputy Scott Rudd to take him to the cruiser. As the deputy walked him to the cruiser, he told Chad, "You have the right to remain silent, and you should ****ing use it." He then searched Chad's pockets and placed him in the back seat of the SUV. While this was happening, Hunter was quickly put in an ambulance and Deputy Sparks picked up Chase to carry him to the ambulance, hoping to get him help. After a few yards, he realized that Chase was dead. There was no saving him. He laid him back in the grass. First responders quickly realized there was nothing they could do to save the boys, and instead covered their tiny bodies with sheets. Deputy Rudd went to find the padded helmets they used for the protection of individuals who were at risk of hurting themselves. When he returned, Chad complained that the car was too hot and his cuffs were too tight. Chad's cuffs had been double locked, preventing them from tightening beyond a safe point. Officers didn't make any move to adjust the AC or Chad's cuffs. They just stood nearby with the back hatch open. In the body cam footage, Chad is heard saying, "Tell them I did it, take me to jail." You can also hear that the officers were at their limit. When officers said, Close the door so I don't kill the mother f*******. Later, when the deputy was driving Chad back to the station, he looked in the rear-view mirror and saw that Chad had worked the seatbelt loose. It appeared that he was trying to wrap it around his neck. The officer stopped and opened the back door to fix the belt, and Chad complained about the cuffs again. The officer just tightened the seatbelt to prevent it from getting loose again and continued driving. As the defense later prepared for the trial, the officers would be criticized for not tending to Chad's request for more AC and looser cuffs, saying that this was a misuse of power. They would also be criticized for their crude language involving Chad. Chad was transported to the station to be interviewed and was officially arrested that night at 10 p.m. During the interview, Chad's calm and cooperative demeanor was no longer as stable as it had been during his arrest. Now, during the interview, he said many things, some that proved to be true and some that were not. One of the claims he made was that he had been planning their murders since the previous October, 8 months before he actually did it. He also said he hadn't been able to sleep the previous 3 nights because his head was filled with thoughts about killing them. He falsely quoted the Bible at one point and said that he should have killed Laura first because she had made the other murders more difficult. Then at some point in the interview, he claimed he had no idea what they were asking about. He said he didn't kill anyone or didn't remember killing anyone. At some points, he said he wasn't the shooter or maybe he had been at work when it had happened. During the interview, Chad was only partially read his Miranda rights. Now all officers have a card that they carry with them with the full Miranda rights on them to be read after every arrest. In addition, Chad would twice mention a lawyer, though he didn't make a clear and direct request for questioning to stop until he had a lawyer. He did at one point say, "I'll just wait for a lawyer. I really don't know. Just give me a couple of days. I'll talk to a lawyer and get nice, good answers." However, officers did not stop questioning or provide him with a public defender. So as we've seen a few times recently, any information acquired during this interview would later be suppressed from his trial. Chad ended up being charged with 21 different crimes. This included 9 murder counts, 3 for each child because of the different aggravating circumstances that went along with each murder. It appeared in the courtroom the next morning in a padded suit often used by prisoners who are a danger to themselves. Body cam footage. You can hear officers talking about how he had refused to get dressed for the hearing. During the hearing, the defense asked for a $75,000 bond. They countered that this was the most heinous crime imaginable and requested a $20 million bond. Judge set bond at $20 million, and Chad left the hearing to be held in Claremont County Jail. Over the next few weeks, Chad would have several phone calls recorded from prison. He spoke to his mother, mental health professionals, and his brother. During a call to a mental health professional, she was trying to determine how dangerous he was and where he should be held in the jail. She asked him if he felt bad for what he had done, and he said no. 10 days after being arrested, he spoke to his mother on the phone. Keep in mind this was after he had a lawyer, and both he and his family had been advised about their plan to seek an insanity or serious mental illness plea. During this phone call, he told his mother that he remembered everything about the day he killed his boys. A few days later, he spoke to his brother and compared himself to Adolf Hitler. Over the next few months, the defense took on the burden of proving that Chad was innocent because he was not in his right mind during the murders. This was partially a direct response to the prosecution being very public about their plan to seek the death penalty. Ohio is one of the states that has a ban on using the death penalty for seriously mentally ill defendants. In 2021, Ohio passed a law prohibiting the death penalty being used in cases of serious mental illness. This is also referred to as SMI. Under Ohio law, if you are suffering from a serious mental illness at the time of the offense, you can have an SMI hearing which will take the death penalty off the table. If the person is significantly impaired and therefore they didn't have the capacity to exercise rational judgment and couldn't understand the significance of their crime, they would not be eligible for death. They would still be eligible for life without parole. SMI has some differences from the insanity defense. There are very specific parameters involved. This law only applies to people suffering from 4 specific illnesses. These are schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, or delusional disorder. To use this defense, an expert must prove the defendant has been diagnosed with one of these diseases. They would also have to prove that they held the diagnosis at the time of the incident and it was impairing their ability to exercise rational judgment. Now, obviously anyone who kills their children out of the blue is not in their right mind. However, in order to prove that you are innocent either due to insanity or a serious mental illness, the defendant often needs a prior history of diagnosis, treatment, or medication showing that they were mentally ill. As the prosecution lawyer would later say, this was a lightning strike from a blue sky, meaning that there was not a history of mental illness. This came out of nowhere. Several experts evaluated Chad. The first two doctors who evaluated him had two different perspectives. Though they both felt that he might have been suffering from a mental illness at the time, one felt that he did not meet the criteria for an SMI plea. Prior to June 15th, he had no diagnoses, treatments, or prescriptions for any mental health conditions. They said it was likely that he suffered from a mood disorder at the time of the murders. However, they determined that he did know the consequences and wrongness of his actions. This was illustrated by the way he warned officers that he wasn't dangerous when they arrested him. Also in the way he said, "Take me to jail." In addition, the phone calls after he was in jail illustrated that he was very aware of what happened. During incarceration, he showed no acute mental health symptoms, received no treatment or medication. His behavior was not consistent with someone in the throes of a delusion. There was also no indication during the body cam footage that he was in the middle of a delusion when he was arrested or being interviewed. The other doctor's opinion was that Chad was bipolar and felt that Chad did not know what he was doing that day. However, in his report, there was no further testing or reports to prove how he had gotten this conclusion. Nothing in his report indicated that his diagnosis was based off the criteria of the DSM-5. After the first two doctors did not agree as to whether or not Chad was culpable for the murders, a third doctor was brought in. This next doctor who evaluated him completely disagreed and did not think he suffered from any mental illness. However, she determined that he did have a history of controlling behavior, issues handling anger, and poor frustration tolerance. She said these were all likely related to his underlying personality structure. When it was made public that Chad was attempting to get an insanity or SMI plea, it caused major upheaval. The public was outraged by the possibility that he could avoid the death penalty. After all, this is what the death penalty is for, the worst of the worst. Many said if it was just judged on conduct and not the why, it was an easy death penalty. Over the course of the past year, the defense filed over 24 motions to try to adjust how Chad's trial would pan out. In addition to the attempt for an SMI defense, they made many other requests. They requested that most of the 350 photos and videos from that day not be shown to the jury due to their graphic nature. They also made a motion to block any emotional testimonies from witnesses. They also made some fairly common requests, like the request that Chad be allowed to wear street clothes and no restraints in front of the jury. One of his more strange requests was to allow convicted felons to serve on the jury. Now this is something that is illegal in most cases, and it's not entirely clear why this request was made. Some speculate that the defense felt a jury of convicted felons might have more sympathy, or perhaps not be as keen to give him the death penalty. However, this doesn't seem likely. A very real stereotype about most prisons is that they are not safe for people who hurt children. So, the idea that other convicted felons would have sympathy for a man who executed his own children seems unlikely. The original trial date was set for July 8th of 2024. However, this was moved to allow for the SMI hearing. When this change happened, it created a challenging chain of events for the court. Judge overseeing Chad's case was a death penalty certified judge and is set to retire in December of 2024. With the delay in the trial, Chad's next date would be set for 2025. Finding another judge who is certified for the death penalty would prove to be challenging. Initially, Chad waived his right to a speedy trial to allow for this to happen. However, this became a non-issue when the defense came to the table at the very end of July 2024 with a plea deal. Chad's team proposed that he plead guilty in exchange for the state dropping the aggravating circumstances that made him eligible for the death penalty. My position became very clear to me throughout this process, and most recently Wednesday, when we discussed this plea offer with Laura, that doing anything further would be actually an act of cruelty toward her. The trauma that these two have experienced that day, and continue to experience, my job as I saw it this week, is to relieve them of that additional agony, and that is why we are here today. On August 2nd, 2024, Chad Dorman pled guilty to 5 felonies. 3 counts of aggravated murder for killing his boys and 2 counts of felonious assault for the injuries that his wife and stepdaughter sustained. Sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. To accept the plea deal, Chad withdrew both of his previous pleas. These previous pleas were not guilty by reason of insanity and not guilty by reason of serious mental illness. Both Laura and her daughter appeared in court, and the judge made it very clear to the media that there were to be absolutely no photos or videos taken of them. The pair were in full support of this deal. Had Chad continued to push toward a trial, both women would have to take the stand and relive that horrific day. They'd have been waiting months or even years to see if a jury found him guilty and what his sentence would end up being. With this outcome, the wait was over. There would not be jurors who have to sit through horrific video footage, stories, and photos. In addition, because he pled guilty, there was no chance of an appeal. This is another gift to the family and the community. In her statement, Laura Dorman requested that everyone remember and talk about her sons, Clayton, Hunter, and Chase, and for who they were before their father took their lives. She said, "Remember them as 3 little boys who loved fishing, go-karting, and swimming. Remember them as the little boys who were always running the baseball fields or running around outside. Remember them as the boys who loved to have fun and were inseparable from one another. Their lives are not only about what happened to them. They are so much more than that. I love you, Clayton, Hunter, and Chase." The 3 brothers were laid to rest on Monday, June 26, 2023. The family held visitation hours from 4 to 8 p.m. followed by a celebration of life. Mourners were asked to wear bright colors in honor of how fun the 3 boys were. In addition, a community event was held to honor the family and thank the first responders. Food was provided by several local churches. The family requested that in lieu of flowers, people who wished to honor the boys would make their donations to improve their favorite baseball field. A memorial sprang up in front of the boys' house soon after the tragedy. It was notably different than many others that we have seen because most things were in sets of 3. 3 heart balloons,